Climb clock countdown to live. So we are officially live. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Blue Talks Amplify Your Message event. This is one of our two Blue Talk signature events. One I get super excited about because it's really focused. It's focused, as people who have visited us before know, around podcasting, around writing, and around speaking. So I love the fact that this one's very laser focused. Our other event, just as a teaser for it, is around mindset. So it's more of a general coffee conversation around mindset, whereas this is more of a coffee conversation around the book business, speaking, and podcasting for those that want to amplify their message. Now, Kelly's been my co-host, I think, since the first one of these events on the author day. And she's been taking on more of a role and continuing on to the other days, it seems, more recently. But Kelly Filardo, I don't know if you wanted to take a second to introduce yourself before we bring on our first guest, but I'm happy to let you do that, of course.
Well, you know what? I think because we're going to have a break after Mark, you and I can do lots of talking then, and I can tell more about my story then. I'd love to just bring Mark on and, let's talk to Mark.
Awesome. And we'll tell everybody a little bit more about Blue Talks then as well. But the short version is, I've jokingly said, which is the best way to summarize it, I think, is if Chicken Soup for the Soul and TEDx got married and had a baby, that would be Blue Talks. It's kind of a mixture between basically spiritual talks in sort of a TEDx format. And so there's the book series, there's this virtual event, there's the live events, and there's also the podcast as well. So it's become a fairly dynamic brand, launched in mid-September. We're only a few months in, and I'm super stoked about it. We've had hundreds of thousands of listeners come on board, so watching the events and watching the YouTube videos. So we've been really blessed. And this is just more about helping people up-level and take their message to bigger audiences. So that's a little bit about Blue Talks. We'll talk a little bit more about it later. But in the interim, let's bring on our esteemed guest. So Mark Sanborn, author, speaker. So happy to have you here today. Mark, what we usually like to do is get our guests to tell us a little bit about themselves, because we're going to dive in deeper anyway. But just for those who may be discovering you for the first time, Mark, what would you tell people in terms of introducing yourself a little bit?
Sure. Well, Corey and Kelly, great to be with you today. I live in Denver, Colorado, but I'm originally from Ohio. I grew up on a dairy farm, and that's relevant because my first speech was in 4-H. I was in a safety speaking contest.
I do, actually.
Well, there you go. I did so badly. I was so humiliated that instead of quitting, I decided to figure out how to be a speaker. And believe it or not, out of abject failure, I launched my speaking career. Became a full-time speaker at the age of 27. So I'm 33 plus years in the business, have written 8 books by major publishers and a handful of books by minor publishers that you probably wouldn't have heard of, and hopefully you didn't read because they weren't that good. And of course, am known probably mostly for my book, The Fred Factor, which came out in 2004. How passion in your work and life can turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. And God bless you for having a copy. All the proceeds from my books go to benefit children. Mine. So I appreciate. Actually, I have a son. My wife Darla and I live here. My son Hunter is a second lieutenant, United States Marine Corps. My second born Jackson is a rapper. So one of these is not like the other. I think you will agree. If you have more than one child, they have very unique and distinct personalities.
So agree. And I have two sons. So I get it. Mine are quite a bit younger, but I'm already seeing their personalities come through. One's 6 months old and one's 3.5. We start really late. So, but yeah, the Fred Factor, as I mentioned to you off air, Mark, and I've mentioned in an interview in the past, that it was one of those game-changing books for me. And especially somebody who speaks on customer service regularly, it was such a unique perspective. And we'll dive into it a little bit, but it was such a unique perspective because for me, the only time I'd seen something like that happen before was my mother had this mail lady who used to bring dog biscuits every day for the dog, even after they said it wasn't allowed anymore. And this one time she went away for a 4-day weekend, and she came home to 4 dog biscuits. And she said, why did you put the dog biscuits in? We weren't even here. And she said, yeah, well, just because you went away doesn't mean the dog should have to suffer. And so my mother had a mail lady like this. And then right after she started telling me the stories about her mail lady, which didn't go to the same extreme as Fred did, then I read the book and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is a thing. And so it really resonated with me. And then the stuff that Fred did just really resonated with me as well. And, I think it's really cool, the relationship you ended up having with Fred. But before we jump too far ahead, I just wanted to mention, yes, Mark, that book really resonated with me. And even though I was heavily into customer experiences and teaching them, it was a next level thing. So thank you for putting that book out into the
My
book.
pleasure. Thank you.
So, Kelly, I want to let you jump in as we go, so I don't want to steal any thunder. But Mark, where I'd like to start, you mentioned something key there when we talked about the book business. You mentioned with some major publishers and with some publishers that people may not know about. One of the biggest questions I get, and I'm sure you get this as well, is should I go with a publisher or should I self-publish? So, can you talk to what your decision is to go with major publishers over and over again? Because people always say to me, why should I go with a major publisher in this day and age? I still have to do a lot of the marketing, et cetera, et cetera. So what really, boiled down to your decision to go that route?
Well, first, let's begin with what might sound like kind of a buzzkill, but my friend Susan Royan in San Francisco says, a lot of people say they have a book inside of them, and for many, that's where it should stay. I think that not everyone should write a book because they want to write a book. If you don't have really good and compelling reasons to write a book, you're going to be very frustrated in any attempt, whether you use a major publisher or whether you get a major publisher or not. The big question, there's several questions that should come.
No, he's frozen. Is that you
right
or
now
me?
Did we black out? Did I have glaucoma suddenly? What?
You froze for a second, but you're 100% back now, my friend. And
Wonderful.
It was just a second ago.
I'm not sure what you missed, so let's go back. I was born on a dairy farm in Ohio. No, I was saying, I quoted Susan Royan, and the idea here is simple. If you don't have a very good and compelling reason to write a book, if you don't have a compelling why, you'll be very frustrated and ultimately very unsuccessful. So before you figure out how to write a book or whether or not to try to pursue a publisher, ask yourself, why am I writing this book? And there are a lot of reasons. People write books as calling cards for their businesses, to prove their expertise, because they want to leave something for family members and those that know them as a sort of legacy. So when you answer the question why, you should also be answering the question, what do you want this book to do for you? And when you know what you want that book to do for you, that helps decide whether or not you should undertake the very difficult task of getting a mainstream publisher. It is harder than it's ever been. The book industry, anybody that's on this event knows, is competitive by and large. Unless you're wildly famous and established author, advances are very low. And you're right, you still do a lot of work even if you have a major publisher. I was fortunate back when we pitched the book, my literary agent, it was originally picked up by a very distinct Christian publisher in Colorado Springs called Waterbrook Press, which has since gone on to merge with another Christian publisher or two. But Random House owned Waterbrook Press, and the publisher at Random House heard me speak. So it was being at a sales meeting where I spoke about the Fred factor that kind of got his attention. So I can't say that I set out to get a major publisher. I was tickled when I got a minor publisher in a very unique market niche, but it was because of that entree, if you will, that I got a major publisher. And here's the other thing. If you want to work with a major publisher, you're going to need a literary agent. Very difficult to do it on your own. It's kind of like if you were up on a murder charge and you wanted to represent yourself in court, you'd be very foolish, right? You'd want to have the very best representation you can get. And that's my opinion about literary agents. Frankly, it's as hard to get a good literary agent, in my opinion, as it is to get a good publisher. Sometimes people say to me, Mark, can you introduce me to your literary agent? And that's a little like saying, is it okay if I date your wife? You have a very unique relationship, and most literary agents will tell you, generally we'll find our own clients. We don't need to look at your friends and relatives and people you owe favors to's book proposals. The major reason for having a major publisher is twofold. My opinion, everything is my opinion. I'm often wrong. But first, it's distribution. Not that, by the way, having a major publisher doesn't guarantee distribution, but it opens the possibility of that because they have existing relationships with bookstores, online, bricks and mortar, and the rest all over the country. They know the book buyers who ultimately determine whether or not your book shows up. The second reason would be credibility. See, the problem is it's so easy to self-publish that a savvy buyer knows, it may or may not be a good book. Maybe they self-published because they couldn't get a major publisher. I will leave that to the quality of the book that you write to answer that question. But if you're looking to get a book out quickly, don't go with a major publisher because it's going to take a couple and a half years. If you have a book manuscript, you can have it self-published and released in a matter of weeks. So that's a big distinction as well.
I love what you just said there, Mark. And Kelly would back up the fact that when we do this event, when people and I talk about why I have both sides. I have self-published and why I went with a traditional. And Kelly, you heard the key word there that I say often, right? Distribution. I always come back to distribution. And the example I'll give, and I'm with a hybrid between, I'm going to say almost self-publishing and publisher. I'm with Morgan James.
Yes.
And one of the things that Morgan James did, which is what I was looking for, is in 2 weeks, somebody sent me a message, said, do you know your book's at Walmart and Target? I couldn't have done that. And I had 10 self-published books. I couldn't have done that with those books in 100 years, in 2 weeks' time. So they, as you said, have the relationships. They have salespeople going in and selling at those places. And so I always say, it comes back to what are your goals? Do you want distribution? What are you looking for? But to your point, Mark, that book is a rare breed where it actually got published, even though it was self-published. And as you know, that doesn't happen very often. But right. I demonstrated the book had sold quite well as a self-published book. But the key thing with that is it still took a year and a half. It was a book that was already on the market and got brought off the market and took a year and a half. So to your point, if you want it timely, then you have to obviously really think about, or do you want to go with a publisher? Because I love what you said, that the fact that sometimes it's as hard to get the agent as it is to get the publisher.
Well, mainstream, Corey, if I can interject, because I'll forget if I don't, mainstream publishers tend not to want books that have been self-published because they believe that the low-hanging fruit's already been eaten, if you will, by the sales that you created as an author. Very important I want to encourage people, but I want to do it and be completely candid. Authors write books, publishers publish books, bookstores warehouse books, and authors sell books. So if you think that the author's job is just to write the book, unfortunately, that isn't true because you will be increasingly called upon by any publisher, hybrid or mainstream, to do the hard work to get your book to sell. So don't think that because you get a publisher, they do it all for you. They certainly help. There's a lot of things, the economies of scale that a good publisher has that you and I don't have, but you're still going to have to do the hard work of selling the book.
Yeah, and just to circle back to that for 1 sec, Mark, and then Kelly, I want to let you jump in as well. But just to circle around to that, you mentioned something else there that I think, I want to make sure we don't gloss over, which is the idea of they're looking for the author that can help them get the book out there as well. And I have a friend of mine who signed with Hay House, and he went to a conference not that long ago, and he said he was shocked because at the conference, they basically said bluntly that, if you don't have either an email list or a built-in following, we're probably going to pass on your book. And his situation is he wrote a song called United Breaks Guitars.
Oh, yeah.
Dave Carroll.
I don't know him personally, but I know of him, yes.
Yeah, so his book, obviously, he had a national story, is, why he was able to get that. But he said, Corey, and he had an email list as well. And he said, Corey, I was blown away. Like, they literally said, could be the greatest story in the world, but we need to know that we're going to be able to move those books because it is still a book business. And to your point, I think why Morgan James was interested in my book that was already out there is it was selling well, but at the same time, they looked at my platform.
Yes.
And so, okay, he has a podcast with thousands of listeners. He has an email list that's thousands deep. And so they looked at all those things and said, okay, we'll take a chance on this. But yeah, to your point, I mean, it's very rare. A friend of mine, and I'm sure you know, the Celestine Prophecy, James Redfield, put out that book as a self-published book. It was an example that went to a published book, but he sold 100,000 copies as a self-published book. I mean, that's an anomaly. And I think they saw this book still selling thousands every single week. Let's jump on while it's hot. And it ended up selling 25 million. But my point of that is these are rare situations where they're going to take on a book that was already self-published. And I think that's important because a lot of people say, I think I'm just going to go self-publish and then I'll bring it to a publisher. But nobody tells them that the publisher usually is already saying, well, do you got another book? Because we're not really that interested in this book.
Everything we talk about is time dependent. If you find an author who did something amazing, Wayne Dyer, 30, 40 years ago, loaded up his station wagon with books and went from radio station to radio station, and that's how he sold books. And if you took that story and you tried to do it today, you would have a very different result. I think sometimes we assume that just because it used to work, it still will work. One of the big challenges that you have as an author is being up to speed on the market, what's working, what's not working, what publishers want, what they don't want. Because if you just take some template, and by the way, something that might work for John Maxwell doesn't necessarily work for me. I'm not John Maxwell. John Maxwell's got a much bigger platform. And you hit the nail on the head. Even if you don't plan to write a book right away, build your platform. Have a blog people can subscribe to, or a podcast, or a YouTube channel. Because the more people that you have that have raised their hands and are interested in your work and follow you, the more attractive you'll be to a potential publisher.
So, Mark, I gotta follow up on one more thing with this. Whenever you talked about Wayne doing that, going to the radio stations. I know, just because I referenced him a second ago, James did that with Celestine. He went to bookstores. He went to 2,000 bookstores handing out the book. And his thing was, his book's about synchronicity. So he said, whoever's in the store at this time is supposed to get a free copy of the book because they're in the store at this time. And of course, that helped what the book did. Do you feel, and I'll add one more caveat to it. I asked Jack Canfield one time, if you were relaunching Chicken Soup for the Soul, what would you do differently now in today's book market? And he said, he gave this like 10-minute pitch of what I'm like, is he planning to do this? Because it was like perfectly sound about what you would do today compared to then. And he said something to the effect of, he would run like a CNN type show with the reel going along the bottom, and he would invite his friends that are also authors who have contributed with him, worked with him, and he would interview them just like as if it was the late Larry King interviewing somebody. And then it would be like a long full day event. And basically he's doing like a CNN book launch.
Right.
And I'm like, that's so brilliant. My question is, do you think we can still take components of what worked for them, i.e., for example, doing a book tour virtually or sending it out to big reviewers now instead of the radio stations? Like, do you think we can do some big components of that and still see similar success? Or what are your thoughts around that?
Well, sure. I mean, the beauty of the internet is it's been a great equalizer. Things that used to take a lot of money 10, 15, 20 years ago now don't take much money at all, thanks to the internet. And I would say there's two challenges. One is to find the intersection between what works and what works for you. By the way you do that is you try a lot of things and you pay attention to the things that work. The other thing, and it's a luxury usually reserved for people who are established authors, is there are some things you can do that will work a little bit, but you don't want to do. I think it was 3 or 4 books ago, I stopped doing what we facetiously call the underwear tour. That's where you're sitting in your underwear, your pajamas, wearing a nice shirt, kind of like we do now in Zoom calls. And Detroit, XK 103 would have you on for 90 seconds. And people be driving to work, and the DJ didn't have a clue what your book was about. They mispronounced your name. But the idea was, if you did enough of those, when people got to work, they'd go online and they'd buy your book or order it from Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Well, that quit working, and I was pleasantly surprised when publishers stopped asking me to do that. There are still exceptions to every rule. Somebody out there right now is going, oh, but I know a guy. Yeah, well, we all know a guy or a gal that broke the rules and it worked, but I know 100 guys or gals that broke all the rules and it didn't work. So I would say find what works for you and then ask yourself, because you don't want it to be a miserable process. I got pretty close to miserable doing those early morning, late night phone calls that lasted 90 seconds or 2 minutes. And frankly, I could never track to any marketplace an uptick in book sales because I did it.
Love that. Well, Kelly, I don't want to steal all the time here. So, Kelly, did you have any burning questions you want to jump in with?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people just think that getting, one of the big 6 publishers is the holy grail. And that once they land one of them, then they're going to be a multimillionaire author and they won't have to do any work. And, that's one of the things I'm loving about our discussion today is that they're not the holy grail. You're still going to have to do the work, and there's still certain parameters that they want you to follow in order to, become one of their authors.
Well, and let me point something out. I've never had a publisher ask me if I had a best-selling book. They could not care less. All they want to know is how many units you moved. Because publishers know that you can game the system. It's often gamed. I love it when somebody says they're a best-selling author, but what that meant is from noon to 1 on Tuesday on Amazon, they had a book that reached the top 10 list in their genre of quilting. That doesn't make you what we historically would call a best-selling author, and it doesn't matter because the publisher doesn't care. How many books on quilting did you sell? I know the old benchmark, and I haven't checked the data recently, is that only about 5% of books sell more than 20,000 copies, which is a pretty low number. And so when you go to a publisher and say your last book sold 150,000, you have just increased the odds they will publish you. If your first book sold 2 million and your last book sold 20, they don't care. It's about the most recent book and the number of units that you moved. And that may be a little ahead of the game for some of your listeners, but it's a good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I have to say, when you mentioned about it really comes down to how many books you actually sold. To your point, here's the person that popped in my head. It's Jay Levinston, who had the Guerrilla Marketing Series. I think And so my publisher, Morgan James, the founder, David Hancock, was telling me that he sold somewhere in the neighborhood of 20-some million books, but he never made a bestsellers list because of how he sold the books. Most of them are in the rooms, him speaking, et cetera, over a course of a 40-year career. But to your point, Mark, do you think they're going to say no to, like, if he was still with us, do you think they're going to say no to him at 20-some million copies or whatever that a number sold is over somebody else that was, an Amazon bestseller for an hour?
Exactly.
Two different worlds altogether. And I don't think he cared about the bestseller list. He was concerned about making impact. And if 20-some million people grabbed your book, I mean, we could whittle down to how many that actually means read the book, but the end result is we know he impacted a lot of lives. So I just want to add that. So Mark, maybe that's a good segue as well, talking about being a speaker and also being an author. How big of a part does speaking on stages play in moving books? I mean, we could go either direction, but obviously at the end of a lot of talks, you have it set up for a book signing. People hear about the story about Fred and want to get their hands on the book. And so would you say that being at those book signings, speaking at those events, has played as big a part as moving a lot of books as anything else?
Well, it's a virtuous cycle, and you can't always tell what drives or supports the other, but it's always good to have a good book and be a good speaker. By the way, they're not the same thing. Just because you give a good speech doesn't mean you can write a good book. I mean, I'm still learning. My I think most skilled set, most accomplished skill set, if you will, is speaking. And even after 8 or 9 books, I'm still learning to be a better writer. I think people think that if you can give a speech, you can write a book. Well, you can write a book, but it won't be a very good book. That's kind of like saying, just because I was a competitive swimmer in college, I can be a good coach. No. Being a competitive swimmer might help you be a good coach, but they're different skill sets. So yes, being a speaker and being in front of an audience, and by the way, they will buy your book if they like your speech. If they don't like you and your speech, it doesn't matter what you're offering your book for. I don't have very rarely in my career sold back of the room. My corporate audiences, they just don't like that. Typically, if they get a book, it will be a copy for everyone in the audience, and then I will, as obviously a gesture of goodwill, stay and sign or personalize books for people. There are still a lot of people that make a lot of money, BOR, back of the room. But again, you need to be a good speaker with a good book. That's the ultimate combination. I was telling the Fred Factor story for many years before it became a book. For many years. I met Fred back in 1988, and the book didn't come out until 2004. So the good news is, I kind of perfected the story. I was able to really craft the story, not only that I was telling, but I eventually wrote about. But it wasn't like it instantly caught fire. There was a good period of time between when the story first came to me and when it finally was published.
Mark, can you tell a little bit about the book? Because a lot of people don't know what the Fred Factor is all about. So why don't you share what the book's about?
Well, if somebody liked to read the first chapter, it's called The First Fred I Ever Met. They can just go to fredfactor.com. And fredfactor.com, we'll share that with you for absolutely free. It's about an ordinary guy who's a postal carrier. He's retired now, real person. I don't write fiction. And he turned an ordinary job of delivering the mail into an extraordinary job. That people loved him. They talked about him. They sent him gifts. They emailed him. He was a rock star, to use the term today, of delivering the mail. And I think, by the way, the reason the book sold well wasn't because of my Hemingway-like writing skills. It was because it wasn't about Bill Gates or Warren Buffett. You know, when we read a book about a famous person, we know we can learn some things, but we also are pretty honest that we're not going to be Warren Gates or Warren Buffett or Bill Gates. They got, you know, they're some of the richest people in the world. Fred had what a lot of people would think was a pretty dead-end job, and yet he had a blast doing it. He built relationships. He added value to his work. And ultimately, he made a very positive difference in the lives of a lot of people.
It's amazing. And Mark, it makes me think, as we mentioned Dave Carroll with the United Breaks Guitar story, I think that's why that story caught on too, is because it wasn't about, as you said, like a Warren Buffett or a Bill Gates. It was about and it was even bigger than Dave, but it was about this Dave. I always joke and say it's Dave versus Goliath because of his name being Dave. But really, it was about this guy who had this sort of bigger company that didn't come, you know, I'm going to just say in a customer service perspective, didn't deliver the way we'd like to see. And he actually waited a year before he ever shared the story. And then ultimately just said, I'm just going to write a song to share my story with people about what you did. And if you meet him, he's also the most kind, unassuming person ever. And he just took a song and took his guitar and wrote a song. But we could all relate. It was universal. We could all relate to having a bad customer service experience.
Let me just say, if somebody's taking notes, write this down, not because I'm profound, but because the idea is profound. And that is, a good story didn't just happen to you. It keeps happening to everybody. Mm. And that's why people buy it. For instance, you said at the beginning of the show that your mom, I believe, had the postal carrier and the doggy treats. Well, you instantly go, hey, I know somebody like that. Or, hey, I know somebody that's exactly opposite of that. I wish they'd be like that. And that's what the power of the story is. Stories are the coat pegs that people hang ideas on. They're the hooks that people hang ideas on. And one of the things, whenever I talk to authors or aspiring authors, is to say that you got to have a hook before you have a book. Mm. Publishers don't buy books about customer service and leadership. They buy the Fred Factor, and they buy You Don't Need a Title to Be a Leader. If there isn't a hook that differentiates you from the topic or the genre, then you're interchangeable.
So true. And Mark, one of the other things I want to go to as we start the process of winding down, because we're in a pandemic right now, we're obviously in a time where there's less travel for live events. I remember, it's kind of ironic, but one of the other two times we spoke in interviews, one of them was just after 2008 with the housing crisis, and speaking had taken a hit because a lot of companies were like, we just don't know if we have the budget, we don't know what's going to happen. And so I'd like to get your take on that. How has the pandemic impacted you from a speaking point of view? Like, have you shifted completely over to virtual? Have you taken a bit of a break? I just love to know how it's impacted you, and how you've also, I guess at the end of the day, risen to the occasion as well.
Well, compared to COVID, 2008 was a flesh wound. I mean, it was a temporary setback. It simply changed the economics of speaking for a period of time, but the basic mechanics of standing in front of an audience live didn't. And of course, COVID has changed that. My last paid speech before COVID really hit, if you will, was March 1st. I didn't speak again in front of a live audience in person until November. And since November, I've only spoken in front of a live audience. Well, not the audiences are always live, but in front of an audience in person one other time. However, every month I do virtual calls. And what we have to remember is that our real value proposition, whether you're a speaker, author, consultant, teacher, is in the power of the ideas that we communicate. And the medium is secondary. The medium I like is standing in front of an audience in person. That's the most fun for me. But you can't sit around and complain about the fact that that hasn't happened and may not happen again for a good long time. You've got to learn another technology for conveying your ideas. And that's the beauty of books, whether they're ebooks or the old-fashioned hardback, paperback books, people can still get your ideas. And they really don't care as much about what happened to you. I know Kelly's got a powerful story. And as much as people empathize with people who have had great challenges, what they want to know more than what happened to you and what did you learn is what can I learn? What can I learn from Fred? What can I learn? Because I've got setbacks. I've got tragedies in my life. I may never talk about them, and they may never be apparent, but you always got to go back to what's the payoff for the reader or the listener. In the medium, that's their choice. But if you can communicate ideas powerfully and master the new mediums, whatever they might be, then you're always going to be successful.
So true. So Kelly, I want to pass it back over to you. I think you've been taking notes on that, so I want to see if you have another follow-up question for Mark.
What would you suggest someone to do to get started? I know you talked about, the why and the what, but what else? Like, what else do you think, like a new author that has a story like the Fred Factor, what would you suggest? How could they get started?
Well, I'll give you a template that's worked for me on a lot of books. First of all, go to the question why that we talked about at the beginning. Next, ask yourself, what is your purpose? Like Simon Sinek famously said, start with why, and then come up with a hook. In other words, that's not the topic. That's the thing that will be unique or specific to you. And once you have a hook, before you ever write a sentence, in my opinion, you should have an outline. And the outline should have each chapter with a heading for that chapter and then bullet points for each outline. The better the outline, the easier it will be to write the book. And I've learned this over time. If you just sit down, the worst way to write a book is to sit down and start, free associating and writing. And after about 2 pages, you're done and you're discouraged. So start with a hook. The title, by the way, can come later. But if you've got the hook, then outline it, bullet point each chapter, and that's when you're ready to write the book. That's my favorite way, and I think the most time efficient way to do it.
Excellent. Yeah. Go ahead, Corey.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask Mark this is similar to Kelly's question, I guess, but if you could, I always ask the time machine question. So if you could jump in time machine and go back and talk to a younger Mark, but I'm going to be specific here and say about the book business, is there 1 or 2 pieces of advice you would give him if you went back and said, this is something I noticed moved the needle, or this is something I would have done differently? What would you maybe say to that younger Mark?
Well, there's 2 things that I've learned over time that I maybe didn't know right away. The first is, if you want to be a good writer, write a lot. Blogs, tweets, emails. The more you write, the better you'll become if you pay attention. By the way, quantity doesn't make you a better writer. Quantity through the scope of quality, tracking how to be better, how to use fewer words, how to be more concise, how to be more powerful. That's why I like Twitter. The real benefit of Twitter to me was it made me take a big idea and condense it in the beginning days down to 144 characters. Same with blogs. I blog every week because it helps me keep my writing chops up. I'm not working on a book right now. I don't have anything in the hopper, but I still write because that's what writers do. The second thing I would say is don't try to write a best-selling book. Just write the best book you can write. I, in a million years, never thought I'd have a bestseller. Why? Because I'm an economist by training and I followed data. And I knew that the odds of becoming a best-selling author were incredibly small. So why chase an odds? Why chase a bad odd that you couldn't probably fulfill? Why not just write a really good book? And if you know what you want that book to do, then you've accomplished your goal. Being a best-selling author is secondary to writing a good book. And one thing I'll tell you that my friend Charlie Jones told me before he passed, he said, keep in mind, books that are in print, you get better, they don't. So every once in a while, somebody will find one of my early book efforts pre-Fred, and I'm, thinking they probably ran across it at Goodwill. It's probably signed to my close friend Bob. And I always say, boy, that's kind of embarrassing because that was written a long time ago when I really didn't know what I was doing. So don't rush to the marketplace because your book will stay the way it was written, even as you improve.
I love that. Who is it that I listened to? Trying to think of who it was that said, David Foster shared the story one time that he used to go to Quincy Jones to get tips and advice. And he said he remembered this one time he went to Quincy and said, I got this new CD. But on track 3, this is wrong, but just ignore that. On track 5, ignore that. And he went through and explained why he should ignore this or overlook this. And he said, you know what? How about this, David? Take the thing back and bring it to me when it's ready.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't excuse all things that are wrong because it's not ready yet. So bring it to me when it's ready, and then I'll give you more sound advice on it. But I always remember that because, to your point, when you put it out there, it's out there. So if you feel that it's not ready, then it might be worth holding back.
Yep, I agree.
Now, at the same time, I guess the other side is, I'm curious now, when you said that to the person that picked up that book, what was their response? Like, did they say, no, though this book impacted me in a big way? Or I'm curious what the response from them was.
Well, that's kind of an allegory because rarely do people tell you that. Normally they just read your crappy book and then don't buy your other books that aren't as crappy. That's, but I have had friends, by the way, when I use that thing about signed to my good friend Bob, I have had friends that have been on eBay or ABE Books and seen a book signed to a good friend, and the good friend's address was the one that was being used to sell the book. And it was they were crestfallen, like, I guess my great friend Bob didn't value the book as much as I hoped he did.
It seems strange to me that the good friend Bob would sell it rather than even at the most like take it into a bookstore if they were done with it and pay it forward, or give it to another friend. It seems wild that they would go out of their way to sell the one book.
People
did give it to somebody and that person sold it.
Yeah. There's always an excuse, but and that'd be the third thing, Corey. If I was to remind myself of something, that is, don't take yourself so seriously. I used to agonize over book reviews. I mean, they'd ruin my day, week. I'd want to hunt the person down and beat them. In my imagination, that was the fantasy I had. And one day I said to John and I had become friends, and I said, John, what do you do about the bad book reviews on Amazon? And I'll never forget what he said, because it was so wise. He said, oh, Mark, he said, I write books to help people, not to get good reviews. Now, ironically, or interestingly, John writes good books and they get good reviews. But notice he said, I write books to help people. So if the occasional person thinks you look like their ex-wife's new husband, they're not going to like your book, and they may even take it out on you. Don't worry about it. That's not why you wrote the book.
Love that. So, Mark, we're down to the wire now, and so I just want to pose more questions, and then I'm going to pass it over to Kelly. Kelly, if you want to think of a final question while we have Mark here. But Mark, I guess the other question I'd like to know is, out of your other books, what one or two would you say if people want to start with your books? I mean, obviously, Fred Factor is a great place to start, but is there one or two that you say, and I understand that they're written separate books, it's
right,
not like continuations, but is there one or two you'd say this is the good starting point book?
Well, that's a great question. All my books, and I didn't know this until about 3 books in, all my books, although they're on different things, have an underlying theme, and that is nobody can prevent you from choosing to be extraordinary. I like to write books that help people be extraordinary leaders, or extraordinary in customer service or sales or their work, whatever area of their life they want to improve in. You don't need a title to be a leader is my second best-selling book behind the Fred Factor. But again, it was written in 2006. And sometimes when you read a book that long ago, you just notice it's dated, right? The high-flying company isn't anymore. My last book, which is the most different of any book I wrote, is called The Intention Imperative. And I did 5 case studies about 5 really extraordinary organizations, ranging from the Savannah Bananas baseball team to High Point University. And that is, if you're a business reader, I don't want to say hardcore, but my most business-like book. If you really are into personal and professional development, then my book, The Potential Principle, is a template, is a system on how you can keep getting better. Books are often said, or it's often said, are like kids. You love all your kids, but you love them for different reasons. And so I would say Fred, and then Don't Need a Title to Be a Leader. My most recent, The Intention Imperative. It's just a fun book. And I was surprised at how all the great organizations shared so many similarities. Even though I didn't do quantitative research, I kept finding the same themes. And then finally, if you just really want to get better at whatever you do, The Potential Principle.
And so, Mark, I said I was going to hand it over to Kelly, but now I'd like to get your thoughts because you brought up something else that I'm curious about. I've always been curious about this. Robin Sharma wrote a book called The Leader Who Had No Title. And, I similar titles. And I even think similar messages. My question is, when something like that happens, do you look at that as that it brings more awareness to the concept? Or what are your thoughts on that? I don't mean in the sense of like, I'm assuming his book was completely written, separate idea, everything else. But the two titles always struck me because they were similar. And I'm a fan of both your writing and Robin. So I'm curious. You probably noticed that come out. So I'm curious.
Well, Robin's a great friend. And I called Robin because our books came out at about the same time. And really, I mean, the essence is that good ideas are discovered by different people. And sometimes, they're discovered at the same time. I didn't know Robin was writing his book. He didn't know I was writing my book. So there was no, stealing of ideas or cribbing. Actually, there is another Fred Factor that was about Fred Thompson, who's now deceased, who was a politician and actor, because you can't copyright a title. But no, Robin and I, I know speakers or authors will read a book and go, oh, they must have read my book. Well, maybe not. Maybe they just reached the same conclusion that you reached, and they told their story differently. So, it sounds like a lot of hubris, but maybe great minds think alike, or at least maybe people who are paying attention reach the same conclusions.
Well, and like I said, I also look at it like by both of them coming out similar times with similar concepts, similar names. It just, to me, it like, what is it? All tides raise all boats or whatever. Like, I think probably people discovered the other one because they're both at similar times. And maybe the idea then you're like, there's got to be some validity if both of these guys are saying it. Yeah. So anyway, I just thought I'd get your thoughts on it. So sure. Kelly, I promised I'd hand it over to you as we bring things to a close. Any remaining questions you might have?
Well, no, it's interesting. I have a client that wants to write a book, and there's, the title she came up with is, there's another book with that title. And I just said, but people are buying your book because they're buying you. They're buying your story, right? And so it's not going to be the same story, and you're not going to tell it the same way as someone with the other title. So I think it's okay, right? Because people are buying you.
Well, I have a very definitive point of view on that. You can't copyright a title. You could write Fred Factor 6 more times, and there's nothing I could do about it. But I do think there's so many good titles out there. Why would you write a book with the same title? I know somebody that just released a book. I searched for it on Amazon, and there are 3 other books with the same title. I would say challenge your thinking and say, how can I come up with a better title? You're exactly right, Kelly. It's that person's story. That is their uniqueness. But if you can write an entire book, you could probably come up with a very creative title if you worked a little harder.
Right. Excellent. So are you planning on to relaunch the Fred Factor? What are your thoughts on relaunching books?
Well, you can't relaunches rarely go well. I can speak from experience, but I can speak from the experience of a lot of other authors as well. We are this week making an announcement, but it's not about the Fred Factor book. It's about Fred Factor online training and licensing. So relaunching books, there's not much upside. That's why if you do get a publisher, once you have a launch date, bust your hump to make sure you do it right, because you're not going to get a second chance.
Okay. So how can people work with you? We know you've got some exciting stuff coming up, and we'd love to hear more about it.
You bet. Well, marksanborn.com. I call the mothership, if you will, of all things Mark Sanborn. You can visit the website, fredfactor.com I mentioned, and, just ping me, Mark at marksanborn.com. I do very little but selective coaching, mostly of speakers. Occasionally, I will give input to writers. Most of my work centers around advising leaders and speaking and writing about that. So if you want to see the things that I can offer, just go to marksanborn.com.
Great.
I love it. And so you both covered off what I was going to say, because I was going to ask you how we could learn more, and I was going to say you have a big announcement coming up as well, and you guys kind of cover both of that. So I did mention sort of off air, Mark, that once the announcement's officially made tomorrow, we'll make sure to make it in here in the group as well. So if you're listening now, make sure to circle back tomorrow and come hear more about the big announcement that Mark has on the queue. And I'm glad that you both covered that idea about a book with the same title, because I put my book out and then 6 months later, somebody came out with a similar title. And to your point, Mark, that's the only challenge I see, and it is what it is. But whenever people search my book, they'll tell me, oh, I found this other book with a similar name. Is that your book, or is this one yours? even though the authors' names are there, I've run into just that confusion because of the fact they're looking up, and that one might come up before mine or vice versa. And so I think for both authors, it kind of doesn't help. But at the same time, theirs with a publisher as well. Maybe they already committed to it, and the publisher said we're keeping his name. And our names are, mine's the Book of Why and How, and theirs is the Book of Why. So,
see, they'll get twice as much from your book because you don't just cover why and how.
I cover 2 times the amount.
There you go.
Yeah, so to that point, I've actually gone through it, and yeah, if it were me in the opposite scenario and I heard it and I had enough time to pull back, I probably would have tried to come up with a different name, even though I was partial to that name. But I totally saying 100%. Awesome stuff. Well, Mark Sanborn, this has been an absolute pleasure. I knew it would be. Want to be your time. We're right to the minute. So thank you, Mark, for joining us today. Thanks for being so open and gracious with your insight. I knew from past interviews you would be. But thank you so much for that. We're putting your website in the comments area. This is live, but then we do the replay and stuff. So for those of you that are discovering Mark for the first time, make sure to go and visit him and check him out. And just know that he's the real deal. I've been following Mark for a long time, interviewed him, like I say, twice in the past. And, you know, Mark, you're always the same person. The consistency is there. So I so appreciate you and all the great work you're doing.
Well, thank you both, and all the best.
Thank you, Mark. We'll
Thank you, Mark.
Awesome. So we'll let Mark run. Kelly, absolute pleasure. Like I said, sincerely the truth that Mark is the real deal. And, you know, I think this is the 3rd time I've interviewed him. And, you know, what I love is whenever you can truly say this person's been consistent. I mean, you heard how long the interviews go back. One of my interviews with him was right during 2008, the housing crisis.
Oh,
you know,
wow.
so
that's a long time ago.
13 years. We profiled Mark in my newspaper I used to have from 2007 to 2012. And yeah, I mean, he's been consistent all the way through. His message as a speaker, his message in his books, and his message during our interviews. So, you know, I think there's something we can take away from that as well, when an author's consistent.
You know what I love is that sometimes when you meet, you know, a best-selling author like that, sometimes it seems like they're unreachable. And that's one of the reasons that I love about, you know, us doing this event is that, you know, during COVID, like these authors want to be connected to their readers, right?
Absolutely.
They want people to know that they are reachable and that, you know, they want to connect with their readers and they want to know more and learn more. And you know, like you said, even though he's not writing a book, he's still writing. Right. And so it's so cool that we're able to connect with these types of authors because they're out there and they're doing amazing. And yet they still want to help even more people.
100%. And I will say, you know, Mark mentioned the 2008 versus now, you know, the housing crisis versus dealing with the pandemic in terms of less live events. And I have to say that one of the things I've noticed this time around with the pandemic is with almost everybody that we've interviewed, they found a way to pivot. And I'll add in a lot of the people that we're interviewing in these events are speakers first. So they're live speakers, and yet they're thriving right now. And so I think that should be, I feel like that should be something we can look to and say, look, I mean, you can still thrive. Here are people that literally in some cases were 40 years branded as a live speaker, and that's their core business. And here they're pivoting. So if somebody can pivot after 30 or 40 years, and I'll use the example, we had Les Brown on. And, you know, Les has pivoted to virtual events. And what he mentioned to us during the interview was, I don't know if I'll ever get on a plane again.
I know. We've had a lot of speakers say that, where they're like, you know what, the benefit of COVID and doing all the virtual events was I can be in 5 different places on one day.
Absolutely.
You know, whereas if I had to fly to all these different places, I wouldn't be able to do it. And so, I was thinking, do I want to go back to traveling? And I do. I love traveling. So I love the whole getting on the airplane and going places. So I love it. But you're right. It's just an incredible experience. Although I do know some speakers. I have a speaker friend who speaks in the safety market. And the problem with him is that he was having a hard time pivoting because he didn't have a coaching program. He had a book, but he didn't have a coaching program, and he didn't have an email list because he would just go and speak and not bother gathering different emails and stuff. So he had no way to really pivot. And so he really struggled with that because he actually needed to get on stage to do his message. But now he's doing some virtual events. But again, he didn't pivot into coaching like you and I. We also have the author, the coaching, programs and that sort of thing. So it makes sense to have more stuff.
Yeah, I think I mentioned too in the past, and this is maybe I would say to people, I'm going to say, if somebody said to me when I first started, you need to start building your email list sooner, and I did it, I would be thankful for that person. Meaning I started like probably 8 years into my career, and my email list is a solid size now, but it took a while. And I just always think of, and especially earlier, if I would have done it when they said it, like if somebody said it right when I first started, it was easier to build an email list then too, because there were things you could do. For example, give away a free book to build your email list. When first time I did it in 2007 or 8, I had 5,000 people to my email list in a month. Well,
wow.
But you couldn't do that now because everybody's giving away free books. So now the book doesn't have the same enticement that it would have. So what I'm getting at is I wish I would have done that sooner. And the same thing, this is why I'm saying, if you're listening now, part of my goal always is to help you discover sooner in life than you would otherwise discover why you should make a change or a pivot or something. So if you're not building an email list, even if you don't think you need one, you need to start building one. That's one takeaway. But the second thing I would say is pivoting. Like you mentioned about coaching programs and that, as you know, well before COVID, I had already started doing my speaking program, my TEDx program. I was doing these things, 2 and 3 years before this, in the speaking program case, 5 years before. And that was me starting to pivot. But here's why I did it. And this is the key thing. 2008. I discovered 2008, I was able to ride the wave barely, like the wave was running out every time I made a pivot. So what I did in 2008 as a paid live speaker with, by the way, no books. And so my situation there was the housing crisis hit. Companies started saying, we have no more budget for speakers. They just didn't hire speakers. And so what I did was I went, okay, who's not hiring right now and who is? And so I basically was doing corporate when it hit, and corporate was the first one hit. So then I did this jump over to associations, and they still had funding because a lot of their members prepaid for the year. So they hadn't lost all that money yet because they already had prepaid. So they still had to deliver trainings. So they still had a budget and a need. But then that dried up because people weren't renewing their memberships. But by that time I had jumped over to education, and then I rode the education wave. And then everybody said that wave wasn't going to die, but it did. It got hit really hard because, again, less people were attending university, for that 1 year. So then I jumped back over to corporate, and corporate had just come back around. So it was like I basically just made it. And I learned a big lesson there, Kelly, which is that you can't have all your eggs in that one basket. The only two things that saved me was that pivoting, and I had a newspaper at the time. And the newspaper, I focused a bit more on that because I had advertising clients. So I beefed up my advertising a bit, while also doing the pivot and making sure I was in specific industries that haven't basically, the bottom hadn't fallen out, but I barely made it. And I made it, and I had 2008, 2009, I had a solid year. There was a stronger year than when I first started, but I feel like I was doing this, and then it kind of took me to do this plateau. The point out of all this is what I would have done sooner is pivot. So if you're listening to this now, whether you're a speaker, a coach, an author, whether you're any of those things, you need to be more than one of those things. Like you need to, if you're doing one thing and focusing on all of it, and you got hit with COVID, meaning that impacted your business, that should be a wake-up moment to say, I need to have more than one egg in the basket. We always hear we should need focus only on one thing and be laser focused and never take on a second thing. But I think that stops whenever we start talking about your business model. Your business model should have more than one facet to it. And Kelly, you're a prime example because you were all in on speaking, and then you made a pivot to helping people launch their best-selling books, and you've had a record year.
I know, exactly. And that was the whole thing with me, was that I was stuck thinking that I just had to be a keynote speaker because I loved it, right? I did. But I wasn't making as much money as some of my friends who were doing the speak to sell model or who had coaching programs. And they were all encouraging me to become a coach. But I was in that whole self-love market. So I wanted to teach people how to love themselves and to know that they're still beautiful. And yet I wasn't finding, I was finding a market to do some keynote speeches for that, but I wasn't finding a coaching market for that. But then what was happening is people were saying, Cal, you need can you teach me how to write a book? Can you teach me how to publish it? Can you teach me how to become a best-selling author? And this was all going on for about probably 3 or 4 years. My thing was that I was suffering from I'm not good enough syndrome, right? Like, even though I had 5 or 6 books out, I still didn't feel like I was good enough to be coaching people. But people kept coming and coming and coming. I was like, okay, I've got to do something with this. Not realizing that, the universe was pushing me into that direction because COVID was coming and I needed to shift. And, my other big thing was that people were telling me, okay, you need to do your own live events, because when you do your own live events, that's where the real money is. And I was like, no. I don't want to I don't want to have the financial expense, because I was scared of the financial cost. And the second thing was, I didn't know if I could get butts on seats. But what I did is I found a way to do an event, and I got the location for free, and I filled it. Right? I filled it. And I was like, oh my God, I guess people really do want to know. Right? And as a result, that started to help me to develop my confidence in doing a live event. And then, of course, it pivoted into virtual events. And I have this beautiful story about it, because a lot of people are scared about doing virtual events and whether they should do it or not. And so one day we were going to do it live, but then COVID hit. So we pivoted into doing it as a virtual event. And then my best friend was supposed to be with me to do it too. And she left because she wanted to, go to Portugal before the border closed, because she was scared she wasn't going to get on the plane. And so then I had to do it all by myself. And of course, then I was panicking even more because, I hadn't done it this way before, right? So anyways, we do the event. And one of the most beautiful stories that came of it was my friend and my client, Maria. And Maria thanked me. She said, you know what, Cal, I am so happy that you did this event as a virtual event and teaching me how to write a book. She says, I was going through chemo at the time. And if you had done this as a live event, I never would have been able to attend. Mm. And now she came to me because she wanted to write one book, and she completely shifted, and she decided to do a book on dating and how to find and keep the man of your dream. And it became a best-selling book. And now she is writing a series of 10 romance novels.
Wow.
And so it is so cool, because she every time we talk, she said, I am so grateful for you, Kelly, because you taught me how to do this. I now, because of her cancer, she says, I can't go clean houses anymore. And that's what my job was. But now I can be an author. And that's all because of you. So.
And none of that would have happened, as you said, if you wouldn't have embraced the idea of doing a virtual event.
Exactly.
Wow, amazing. Well, and one of the things I wanted to add too, and then I put a Facebook post, but I put it on my main page, so I'll just let people know. And then I want to circle back to what we're talking about now. So we have our next guest is coming up in about a half hour, and that's why Kelly and I are having a general conversation right now. We have a break between, but our next guest, just as a heads up, if you're watching this now, I just posted it on my Facebook page. Our next guest is the co-author of the book called Fish, and I don't know, I won't assume whether you heard of it or not. That's why I put the cover image up, and I said, if you've heard of this book, he's coming up soon. That book sold over 6 million copies worldwide. I don't know what it is now, but it was at 6 million on the cover that I just posted, and I have the book right over there. And it's actually become like I want to talk to him about this, but I think it's become like an actual, almost like a Broadway play that they bring into companies now and run it in front of the company, like almost like a customer service play. But basically, and we'll talk more with him about this, but the premise of Fish is that they went to film a poet, I believe in Seattle, and while they were waiting, they went to the fish, what is it called? The Pike Place Fish Market in Seattle just while they were wasting time before they went to film him. And they saw this place where they were working, all these employees were working in like fish and guts and all that. And yet they were like the happiest people ever. And they were throwing fish around and chatting and joking, handing customers yogurt while they waited, and all this cool experience they were creating. And they're like, we need to film this. And they basically did a documentary on it. And then they ended up putting together a customer service video around it, which became, I believe, one of the best-selling customer service videos of all time around this fish place. And then they put the book Fish out as a parable, like a nonfiction book, or sorry, a fictional book, but built around a nonfiction story. And obviously, the results speak for themselves. So we're going to get to talk to him about what it was like to have a book that sold that well and how it sold that well and all that kind of stuff. So I just want to give people a teaser as to what's coming up. To circle back to what you were saying, Kelly, one of the things I wanted to add in there was about the pivoting thing and about COVID and why it happened to us. You know, my co-host for my other event, Elise, says that she thinks part of it is that it's that we actually have been begging for this because people have been saying, I want to work from home more. I want to have more opportunity to work digitally and all this. And she feels enough people collectively were saying that the universe said, well, here's your opportunity for those that was what they were wanting. You know, and it's always hard to look at something like that that's happened where it has impacted negatively people as well. And first gave this to us. But I will say for those people, they were asking for that. And are we still here? Can you hear me, Kelly?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I was just looking to see if it's my Wi-Fi or your Wi-Fi, but I'm connected, so.
I'm not sure mine is connected too, but it did them spinning. So, but yeah, so as far as the COVID thing, I mean, as all things negative, there are some positives that come out of it. And for those people that were wishing for an opportunity to work from home, or run their own business or whatever that looks like, this may have been that opportunity. But the flip side for me, to the point about pivoting, is I've been wanting to do a member site, as you know, for a long time. I've talked about it behind the scenes a lot. And I keep every year going, okay, next year I'm going to get this done. Next week I'm going to get this done. Next month. And it was always being pushed off because everything was too busy. And so now I'm literally, as long as everything stays the way it's supposed to right now, a month and 12 days from launching this member site that I've been working toward forever. It's going to be called the Influencer Vault. And the bottom line is it's a way for me to impact people that I couldn't before. And it's a monthly membership site. So people are going to be able to join for a rate that I could never allow them to work with me before. And we're going to have live interviews with celebrity influencers on a weekly basis. Like all that stuff couldn't have happened if COVID hadn't happened. In the sense that the ultimate goal was to have this happen, but it would have been pushed off, I'm sure, another year or two. And so to that point, I see it as an opportunity for me to pivot again, but also to deliver something that I feel can impact a lot more people than I can do one-on-one or even through my programs. And that wouldn't have happened without this. So I think at the end of the day, we have to also look and say, you know, for every bad in this, there has to be some doors that have opened for people.
I totally agree because, you know, you and I, before COVID hit, I mean, we were traveling so much and, you know, we didn't have a lot of time to do some of this stuff. And that's the same as with me is that, you know, now with COVID, like there's 24 hours in the day. And a lot of times I'm working 10, 12 hours a day, but it's also because I'm loving what I'm doing too. There's a lot of stuff that I'm doing that, you know, now coaching people and helping them to become best-selling authors. And even with the Blue Talk book, you guys can probably see we've got the 3 Blue Talk books. And, you know, launching that was we did that right after in January when we got to launch the book 2 and 3. And it was just beautiful being able to make a bigger impact. So I feel like sometimes I'm actually able to make a bigger impact now because I'm helping people to get their books done and get them out. Because a lot of times they're so busy, they can't do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely, we can, you know, it's easy to say all the negative that has happened as a result, but there's also definitely been a lot of positive that I've seen happen in the last year as well. One of the things I want to show you here, Kelly, is Brenda made a comment, so you can probably read that there. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to go grab something.
Thank you, Brenda. So she says, I totally agree with you, Kelly. I so am that, suffering from not good enough. You are amazing with how you have come out of that more confident and resilient. Love your story. Thank you, Brenda. Yeah, you know, a lot of times we struggle with that I'm not good enough. And a lot of times the reason we're struggling with the I'm not good enough is because we're comparing ourselves to people who are better than us. And I love this quote that Rachel Hollis says. You know, I can't remember which book of hers it's in, but the quote is this: don't compare your beginning with my middle. So here I am, I'm comparing myself to, you know, Lisa Nichols and, you know, all these big name speakers that I live up to, or that I love, that I want to be like, or, you know, have their style or that type of thing. And so if I'm comparing myself to them, of course it makes me look like I'm not good enough. But if I compare myself to where I was 10 years ago, when I was in a toxic marriage, I was, you know, going through my divorce, we were almost bankrupt, you know, like there were so many things that were going on. It was like when I compare myself to 10, 11 years ago, I'm doing like absolutely incredible, right? So, and I know more than the person who was just starting out. Like when people come to me with a blank page and say, I don't know how to make a book out of that, I can teach them how to do that, right? But when we go and we compare ourselves to, you know, like Mark Sanborn or, you know, Les Brown or Lisa Nichols that have sold millions and millions and millions of books, of course it makes us look like we're not good enough. So we need to stop comparing ourselves. That's the first way to get over that I'm not good enough trap, is to quit comparing yourself to people who are better than you. Compare yourself to where you were 5 or 10 years ago. So that's where it is. Go ahead.
Yeah, I love that you said that in terms of, you know, the idea, like the Rachel Hollis quote, stop comparing your beginning to my middle. I love that, because it's like I talk about, you know, when I'm talking to people on the speaking side, and I always say, as far as speaking, you know, who are you trying to become? And I always tell people, you need to become the first Kelly Falardo, like first yourself. I don't mean become Kelly. I mean become the first John Smith, whatever your name is. But stop trying to become the next Tony Robbins, because when Tony Robbins started, he wasn't trying to become somebody else. And to your point, you know, when it comes to that, I mean, I think that's the thing we run into is we're seeing Tony Robbins, and he's at not even the middle; he's past the middle, and we're at the beginning, and we're like, well, I want to become Tony Robbins. Well, you know, again, that's 35 years in the making. Not only that, you should become the first you anyway. And I think that's the other thing we miss, is it's easier to become the first you than it is to become the next Tony Robbins. Plus, people will look at you better if you're the first you than the next Tony Robbins. But I think we do get caught up in that whole thing of trying to become the next so-and-so.
Well, and the other thing is too, the reason people want to be like you or drawn to you is because of certain qualities or certain things you have or certain things you do. Like one of the things that people say about me is that they love the way I tell stories. Well, that didn't happen overnight. That is something that I've taken 10, 11 years to develop, right? By getting in touch and learning from like Eric Edmeades or Corey, yourself, or, you know, Lisa Nichols, like watching some incredible speakers that I'm really drawn to. So if you want to become more like that person, then learn from them, right? Learn what they're doing and, you know, how, like, get involved in their coaching programs, right? Like all that kind of stuff.
You know, what it makes me think of when you said that is, I think too, like if you want the shortcut, and of course there's shortcuts in the world, but if you want the shorter version of what you just said, Kelly, then learn quicker. You know, study more people more often, put more time in. And I know it's a weird comparison, but it made me think of that. I heard it from Arnold Schwarzenegger, said it one time, and I thought it was always so funny. He said, you know, people complain and say, well, I don't have enough time in my day. And he said, basically, like, you know, he said you have whatever hours to sleep, and they said, well, I only end up getting 6 hours of sleep. He said, well, then sleep quicker. You know, like get it done quicker than just do. I mean, it sounds so simple, but obviously we get that, you know, it's study harder isn't really something that's easy to do. But what I think he's saying is stop with the excuses. You'll
Yeah,
find
stop excuses and just do it, right? Like I have people that come to me and say, "Well, I can't write my book," and I said, "Well, why?" "Well, I don't know. I just can't write it." Well, just do it. Like do the work. That's the whole thing, right? That's why you are where you are, Corey. That's why you've done multiple TEDx talks. That's why you're coaching people. That's why you're building all this stuff, is because you're doing the work. And people say to me, "Well, how come I don't have a full slate of speaking gigs? I've been doing this, this, and this, and I've got my bio, I've got my one sheet, I've got my topics. Now I should be speaking full time." Well, no. Have you done the work? Have you, promoted yourself or pitched yourself or, got in touch with event planners, all that stuff. And, sometimes I get upset because I feel like I'm not doing enough or that I haven't got enough speaking gigs or virtual events. And ultimately it's because I'm not doing the work. Right?
I have to add too, if you're like, for example, if we, and I think there's always a way, which is what we leave out too, is do the work, but realize there's always a way. So here's an example. Somebody could come to you, Kelly, and say, "Well, I can't write a book." And you're saying, why? We all have the same amount of hours. You have enough time to do it. And what they're not maybe telling you is they maybe just physically say, "I can't write a book." Like maybe they have literary issues, like maybe they're dyslexic or what have you. Well, here's what I mean when I say there's always a way. Lisa Nichols, I've shared this story in the past. I didn't realize this, but during an interview with her, she told me she was dyslexic. And the first thing I thought, this is the way my mind works, is how did you write a book? How did you write 2 New York Times bestselling books if you're dyslexic and have the challenges that, and she told me it takes her like 3 or 4 months to read a book that somebody else read in a week. And so I'm like, wow. And so my first head thinking is, that must have been so hard to write a book. How did you actually write it then? And so she told me, she said, with a lot of difficulty. She said that she had a person behind her holding space for her 12 hours a day while she wrote. And she got this big advance check. And she's like, "Oh, I got this big advance check, got to write the book." But what she did do is she honestly said, "I don't know if I can write the book." So what she did was she left the money in a separate account and said, "I may have to give back this money. So I need to see if I can write the book before I cash the money, cash the check or whatever." And so what she did was she worked on the book, and this is going to be people are going to be surprised that the end result of what I'm going to tell you, she couldn't write the book. She ultimately decided she couldn't write the books. So you might think, okay, well, you just said she had 2 New York Times bestselling books, but yet you're saying she couldn't write them. What did she do? Gave the money back. And how did she do that? What happened was she said, "You know what? I'm not a great author, like not a great writer. I shouldn't even say author, not a great writer, but what I am is a great interviewer." So what she did was she hired people to interview her. She set up a whole thing in her office, and she also realized she could repurpose the stuff so she could turn it into a course and other things. But she hired people to interview her, filmed the interviews, and then she got the interviews transcribed, and that became her books.
Exactly. And that's exactly one of the methods that I teach when people come to me and say, "Hey, I want to write a book, but I can't." And I say, "Well, let's get it recorded. Right? And let's do this. And here's the tools you can use, and we can make it easy for you." But yeah, absolutely. That's one of the best ways to do it.
And Ray Como, hopefully, Ray, I'm pronouncing your last name right. I know Ray Como and Ray Como. So, sorry, I know 2 people. One's Como, one's Como. So I'm probably pronouncing one of those 2 wrong. But there was actually just a small side note. Ray, there was a place called Ray's Hoedown where I grew up, which was like almost like Hee Haw, and the guy that ran it was Ray Como. So anyway, having said that, that was a little weird side note backstory thing. But Raymond says, "Many of us have stories with a message that can help others to overcome their inadequacies. The trigger comes from those who bite the bullet and do it." So this goes back to what you were saying, Kelly. Write the book, just do it. But then we often forget the backside to that is you could be impacting lives when you do bite the bullet and do it. But when you don't bite the bullet and do it, those lives may never get impacted by you.
Totally. And, a lot of times what my clients say to me too is they say, "Well, who am I to write that story?" And I said, "Because you lived through it. That's why." Right? It's just like I had one guy try to hire me to speak for their Alcoholics Anonymous group. And he wanted me to teach them how to quit drinking. And I said, "Well, I can't do that." And he goes, "Yeah, but you're an overcomer. You should be able to teach that." And I said, "No, I'm not." I said, "That would be like me asking you to go and do a speech about what it's like to have a skin graft. You couldn't do that, right? So I always share that with people, that you are the right person to write your book because you lived through it, right? You have that story, and that's what's going to impact people.
Absolutely. And Elise, I mentioned my co-host of the Flip Your Script event. She just checking in to say hi as well. So hi, Elise.
Hi, Elise.
I was going to add to that, Kelly, what you said. And by the way, because I'll forget to say this, and they're right beside me, but I mentioned that one of the co-authors we have coming up right there with my fingers, Harry Paul, who's going to be coming up to talk about fish. And then I mentioned that, referenced this earlier, Robin Sharma, the leader who had no title. So it was easy to find these books because I have a shelf over there that I call the customer service bookshelf. And so these ones all fall into that category. I didn't even think about that until I was just going to the shelf, is that our two back-to-back speakers, first two back-to-back speakers, both have books about creating customer experiences, and they're both parables.
Oh, that's excellent. I can't wait.
And they picked their own times. Like, that wasn't even like I scheduled them like that. But, back to your point, Kelly, I feel like this comes down to everything, is that we all, actually Marco, one of my producers of the podcast when I started it way back 9 years ago, he said one time during one segment that I never forgot, and it was just the wording, we all know it, but he said, it's not that you don't have the time, it's just that you haven't made that thing a priority.
Exactly.
And that you have to say, every no you say to something, you're saying, you can say yes to something else, and every yes to say to something, you're saying no to something else. And so what he's saying is, you've said no to this. Like, let's say it's the workout every day. You've said no to that. You haven't made a priority, and that's why you don't have the time to do it, because you're doing something else in its place. You've just decided it's not a priority.
It's interesting because one of my mentors, Eric Edmeades, and we'll have to get him on to the Amplify Your Message next time. Anyways, Eric was talking about procrastination. And so at my house, like my living room, my kitchen, my dining room is all one area, and my office, right? I had to build myself a little office. And so, I can look and I can see in my kitchen that there's dishes that need to be washed. And so a lot of times it's like, oh, I should work. Oh, no, the dishes should be done, right? Then I should go back to working. So one of the tricks that Eric taught us is procrastinate that. So procrastinate on the dishes and keep moving forward on your work. And that was the advice that he gave us, is, you've got to get that done. Get it done. The dishes can wait. Or the laundry can wait. Because a lot of us are working from home now, right? With COVID, we're all working from home. And so we get distracted because we've got to do dishes, or we've got to take the dog for a walk, or we have to, do the laundry or make the bed, or whatever all those things are. But what he's saying is procrastinate that and get the stuff done that you need to get done.
So when we were talking earlier to Mark, and we talked about books with the same title, and he said, if you can write a book, you can come up with a new title. And you just gave a great book title. I mean, I shouldn't say it out loud, but I'm one of those people that I'm like, just, it's, I think that whoever's meant to write the book will write the book. So nobody's going to steal it. It's if they're meant to write it. But anyway, that's a great book title. The Dishes Can Wait.
The dishes can wait. Oh, and I thought you were going to say procrastinate that.
No, the dishes can wait, because I think saying, what is this? Is it a business book? Is it a personal development book? But it's also just, I don't know. It's just, I love pithy titles that are short like that. But I want to just give a shout out to one of our Blue Talk speakers. And this wasn't intentional. I had it sitting over here on the table. I think it was because I was going to do an interview with her about it. But Amy Murphy, you met Amy, I don't know if you remember, but you met her at one of my live events. She traveled from Halifax to the Edmonton event. The events, and she's the person that has the $1 million bathrobe. That's her brand, because she got into network marketing after 19, I think, or 17 failed experiences in network marketing. And her next one, she became a millionaire, or she had $1 million a year.
Wow.
So that's her story. This is her brand, is the $1 million bathrobe. And so this is her book that came out with her sharing her experience. So that's a shout out for one of our Blue Talk speakers. And the other thing I want to say, we got probably about 10 minutes before our next guest comes on, but I want to add too, when we talk about what's happened as a result of COVID, I feel like some people with books, Well, I heard through my publisher, they said that overall, I think it was them that said it. I'm pretty sure. They said overall book sales in 2020 took a bit of a hit. So they were down a little bit. But some creative authors had unmatched book sales that they wouldn't have probably had if they wouldn't have got that creative, which COVID forced them to get creative. So in other words, individual authors, some had book sales they wouldn't have had and higher book sales, but I think the industry may have been down just slightly, which would be expected. Even though a lot of people said everybody's home reading, I feel like it's like everything else, right? We say, well, I'm home now, I have lots of time, but we still don't usually seem to fill it with the stuff we say we do if we had more time. And I know myself, I may have bought more books in 2020, but I didn't read more books. I actually read a little bit less, which is unusual for me. I usually read a lot, and I was probably a book a month. I usually read 3 to 4, sometimes 3 to 5 books a month. Having said all that, I actually had my book coming out, The Book of Why and How, coming out, as you remember this probably. I had the digital launch happen before COVID, and we had a lot of success with the digital launch. It did everything I hoped it would do, and we had the great success, and we had basically we made #1 in 4 bestseller lists like the Barnes & Noble, Kobo. Apple, I think we hit #7. And again, we can't watch these 24 hours a day, so it may have hit #1. I just only watched it every now and then. But the point is the digital book did really well. And then the print book, the day I was supposed to do my start of my launch and actually accept my book on the red carpet, like do an interview with holding the book with the publisher, was the day they announced COVID as a pandemic. And 3 days before, we were en route to Nashville for the event and had to call off the trip because our flight was delayed. Flight got canceled, and we took that as a sign. But my point is, my print book launch definitely got impacted. And so why I bring this all up, Kelly, is my plan now is that almost a year later to the day, I have a whole launch plan set in place for the Book of Why and How. And, to go back to what Mark said earlier, it's hard to do a relaunch, but I'm destined. I'm making it so that I'm going to prove it's possible, because I have a lot of things I was planning to do with the launch that I didn't do at all. I just put it all in the back burner. One example is I want to get like 100 influencers or more. I might even go to the extent of getting everybody in the book. In the back of the quotes, we have 400 people to do a video, a 1-minute video of how they found their why. And then what I want to do is post 3 of them a day. What I'll also do is take some audio from that and make a podcast from scratch where I don't have to do anything new for the podcast, just use those clips. But my point is I'm planning to do a lot of stuff. I have that's 2 things out of probably 120-point plan that I have for the launch. But I'm going back all in on it because I feel like I got ripped off from my real launch. And then I got busy because I was pivoting and couldn't get back to it. But now I've set up things so that after my member site launch, I'm going all back into the book. So I do believe you can relaunch, but I also do agree with what Mark said. It's very, very hard to do.
Well, it's interesting because like my first book was written 11 years ago, No Risk, No Rewards. And so I'm being encouraged to relaunch it because it's 11 years old now. And so, while a part of me might agree with Mark on that, I'm not sure I do totally agree, because I believe that, in 11 years, I've met my whole tribe. Probably a lot of them have changed over. I've got a new tribe now and new community, and I'm doing things in a different way. And I think to me, it's all about promotion. So, and also too, 11 years ago, the internet isn't the same as it is now. Like back 11 years ago, you weren't doing as many videos. You weren't doing as many pictures. Now, to me, the internet is a lot more engaging, and there's a lot of things that I haven't tried. So I actually believe that if I did a relaunch on my book now, that it would do 10 times better than it did 11 years ago.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, there's other factors right now, and you have more knowledge, and there's other things you couldn't have done back then. And I think what he probably means too is the big media launch, because the media is probably not going to have as much interest in a book that was already out as they. And I heard this through my, I don't know if this again through my publisher, or if I heard it, but whoever it was a source that knows that. And what I was told is basically the hot spot, like if you want to get on big media, they care about your book 4 months before it's out and 4 months after, and that's it. So you have like an 8-month window. And so, yes, can you still get media spots after? Yes, but you're probably going to get it based on more the strength of you and your story than the book at that point.
Right.
Like, they love saying a new book's out when a new book's out, but they don't love as much saying a new book's out whenever somebody gets the book in the mail and says 2020 and it's now 2021.
Right. And, you know, it's interesting. I haven't been able to tell you this yet, Corey, but my documentary is actually going to be revived.
Oh, really?
My documentary. And it's actually thanks to you because of the connection with Tyler Wagner and Adam Hoagie. So a couple guys that I've been working with, they're working with a producer also, or a distributor that is actually interested in taking on my documentary and taking it into the States. So that's something that's just happening right now. And so it's going to be cool because if relaunching doesn't work, then it's not very good. But I believe that relaunching will work. And because we're going to be hitting markets that we've never, ever hit before. So that's why I'm not really worried about what Mark says that relaunches aren't always the best idea, because I believe it all depends on the kind of effort that you put into marketing and promoting and the media and everything. And in the US, I don't have a lot of media, right? Other than, you know, what we did before is we just did like in the free media where we've done press releases, but I don't have any like television interviews or anything like that in the US. So I believe that we can do quite well with it.
Well, to that point, when we talk about books and the power of books, I'm going to share this just, I think, backs up the power of books. Is I just so I have my notifications on today, not to interrupt me, but because we're doing this event, and of course I need to know if a speaker can't make it or something like that's happening. And so I have my notifications on. But what that also means is my email notifications will send me a message that I just kind of disregard it. But I noticed something, and I won't say any names, but I noticed somebody that has been watching the event today just went and grabbed they must have grabbed a copy of my book, The Book of Why and How, just for me talking about it now. Because in the front of the book, and this is a little tip for people, is in the front of the book, it says, "Thank you for grabbing a copy of our book. If you want a free copy, if you want the free audio version, go here." And then it gives you the website. And so when somebody does that, they're basically, we have to deliver digitally. So they're coming onto our email list. And so I get notifications somebody was added on. And what it tells me is someone has just opted in to the Book of Why audio, which tells me they went to the book, then saw the audiobook and ordered the audiobook. And then, but here's where it gets really interesting. Let's see, that was 3 minutes ago. And then the other notification I saw, which was less than an hour ago, was somebody grabbed my copy, The Book of Public Speaking, which is a separate book altogether. And then they were added to my email list. So in less than an hour, while we're on here, you know, this, like, as they say, while you're sleeping, while we're on here, I had 2 people join my email list because I'm an author.
Right.
And because of 2 separate books I have. So that's the power of books. When people say, you know, why should I be in a book if I can't make $1 million on the front end of the book? That's why. There's so many other things that happen as a result of you being in the book. Having said that, this is a segue because we have our next guest here. So I am going to bring him on. I said the word book and he popped on. So it feels like, we drifted away from books for a few minutes. And the fact that he popped on as soon as we said book again, I feel like that's a sign I'm supposed to bring him right on. So, Harry, Paul, can you see us, my friend?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
We can. Or I can.
Right. Let me shut off the heater. All right. Now I got good sound. They're trimming a tree 2 doors down. Can you hear it?
I can't at all. I don't know if you can, Kelly.
Perfect.
No, good.
All right.
Awesome. Perfect. So, Harry, this is my co-host for the week, Kelly Filardo. And I'll let Kelly, if you wanted to say hi to Harry, I'll let you guys say hi before we jump right in.
No, hi, Harry. I've never met you before, and so I'm so excited that you're on our show with us today. So Corey said amazing things about you, and I haven't read your book yet, but I hear it's amazing. So I'm looking forward to learning more about you.
Well, thank you. And I'm interested in hearing some stuff from you that, you know, it's never too late to learn, is it? And especially in the book marketing and the book selling business, which seems to be a moving target nowadays, doesn't it?
It
100%.
is.
And, you know, and we'll dive right in, Harry, but I'll tell you, it's funny. We just had, I think it was 2 events ago, Mark Victor Hansen,
Yes.
Chicken Soup for the Soul, of course. And Mark, it's funny, he's reinventing himself again with the book. Like he's like doing, I don't know how many podcast interviews he's doing a week, but he asked me about connecting him to podcasters. I connected him, I think 20, and almost every one of them came back within about a month. Said, all right, I had Mark on last week. So he's went into podcasting interviews to help promote his new book called Ask. And so there's an example of somebody who's not resting on his laurels. He's completely pivoted in the way he's approaching it. He's using podcasts now. So
Right.
there's always new approaches and always new things to learn. So I love that you said that. So Harry, as we jump in, what we usually do is get the guests to introduce themselves a little bit, and then we dive in a lot further during the interview itself. But can you tell us just a little bit about your backstory for those that may be discovering you for the first time, and then we'll dive in deeper?
Sure. My background is in art. I was a commercial artist, and I moved to California, and it's hard to get a job as a commercial artist. So what any smart person does, start a business. It was easier. And what I did was I designed and printed books for authors who want to self-publish. And I had the perfect name, Budget Books. And it went very well, I know. And doing that, I met 2 authors. I've done a lot of books, but 2 stuck out, Ken Blanchard and Spencer Johnson, who moved my cheese in the 1 Minute Manager. And I became friends with them. And I printed the first 4 editions of the 1 Minute Manager and The Precious Present, which were both self-published before they went to publishers. So I was doing that, and then Ken offered me a job at his company, working for him, helping him with his speaking and his publishing, which I just got married. I didn't want to be in business for myself anymore. So I took the job, January 1985, worked for Ken, had all his publishing contacts, and the fish video comes out, which my book is based on. And they offered the book to Ken Blanchard. Well, Ken can't say no. Part of my job description was say no for Ken. And I said, listen, Ken likes the video. He didn't like the book. He's not interested. I read the book, and you kind of missed the mark. So they took that as feedback to go rewrite the manuscript, my 2 co-authors. They wrote it. They sent it to Ken. Ken gave it to me. He said, Harry, tell him I'm not interested. I said, Ken, I read the book again, and I know what's wrong with it. He says, well, share it. And I shared it with them, and they said, be a co-author. I said, no, take my feedback as a gift. Sometimes you make mistakes. So they kept on pushing and pushing, and I finally said yes. Which is funny because when I was doing when I was printing the 1 Minute Manager for Ken and Spencer, they offered me 10% of the book for a 5,000 copy printing, and I said no. So it looks like I was going to make a mistake a second time, but thankfully I said yes. And rewrote the manuscript. There were just 5 things I changed in the manuscript, made all the difference in the world. I had the publishing contacts. I had an agent contact, and we sent it out to 13 publishers in the first week. And in the first week got 3 offers, and actually had one of the publishing company we went with started bidding against themselves. Good agent. And we sold that first book in 1999. It came out in 2000 for $250,000. And it went crazy. And so far, we're at 6 million copies.
Wow. Such an amazing story, Harry. And, there's so many directions I'd love to go through from there. But one thing I'd like to ask everybody is, what was ultimately, you were working with Ken Blanchard and you had publishing contacts. What do you think is the reason? And I understand it's different today than it would have been then, but what do you think is the reason for people to choose either publishing with a traditional publisher or self-publishing, in your opinion? Because that's the biggest question I get all the time. Which way should I go? And so I always love to get other people's thoughts on what do you usually tell people when they ask that?
Yeah, shame we only have 45 minutes. I guess one of the easiest ways of looking at it is, when we sold the book to Hyperion Books, which is a Disney mark, which was owned by, I guess, Disney owned ABC, that whole media conglomerate, they gave us a 20-page marketing plan. That is a big deal. When you have a marketing plan, they set up author tours, they go after the book clubs. They had, some contacts at Amazon back then. 2000, Amazon wasn't at the Amazon today. And today, on my last book, when I published it, I think it was about 4 years ago, the first question the publisher asked me was, where is your marketing plan? So you see that big difference. So I think nowadays, if you have, I think, 3 things, you can get away from traditional publishing in my area, business books. And I think the first thing, you have to have a book that's good enough to pass along. I give it to you, Kelly. Kelly, you read it and go, Corey, you got to read this book. It has to have that. And included in that is crossover. Business book that'll be a self-help book that can help in a personal life. The second thing is, what kind of platform do you have? Corey has a great platform. I imagine you do as well. How many people can you reach through your emails, your marketing, your social media presence, and all that? And the third is, do you have the ability to go out there and speak? Are you a somebody that they call on as an expert, or people want to hire you? So platform, like a tribe, a following, and the pass along value. I think if you have those.
Oh, did we lose him?
I think he froze up. I don't know if we lost him yet, but hopefully the worst part is you can't do much about it once it's stuck, right? You can't troubleshoot it really. So we'll just.
I think you can do without.
Can you hear us okay, Harry? Oh.
Interesting, because I'm hardwired to the internet. No Wi-Fi.
I don't know what happened there. I am as well. We can see you on the other. I can see you on bottom twice. So I'm gonna take your other one off.
Okay.
We got twins happening here.
So I think you were right at the very end, Harry. I think you were saying if you had these things, and I think you were at the last one.
Right. I think you can get away. And if I'm not mistaken, Seth Godin went from going to traditional publishers to doing it himself, because he had such a tribe, such a following, that he can bypass that, especially since the majority of the books are sold online. The stores are gone. You have to travel miles and miles to come upon a Barnes and Noble. And they're more gift stores than they are bookstores, from what I can see. So it's changed so much. I think you can be successful. And there have been very successful books that have been self-published. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey was originally self-published. The 1 Minute Manager. Who Moved My Cheese wasn't. The Precious Present was. So there's lots of things that you can do. But if the traditional publisher offers you enough money, you might want to consider going with them.
Well, and I always say, Harry, too, the big thing you have to decide is what's your goal. And if one of your goals is distribution, this is a book that I think can impact 1 million lives, it's going to be hard to do that self-published, or harder. It's going to take you longer with a publisher, and it might take you a lot to get a publisher. But if distribution's your only and ultimate goal, then you may have to look at a publisher. Otherwise than that, I feel like there's so many benefits to self-publish now as well.
Yeah, there are much more avenues than when I was doing, budget books way back in the 70s and early 80s. Nowadays, I've never self-published because I've had the good fortune of being able to get published. But at this point, I have another manuscript I'm working with an author on. It's on accountability. and it's called Who Pardoned Accountability? Because it seems like accountability is elusive nowadays. Let's put it that way. And I am right now torn what to do with that book. It's a good book. It's written as a parable. It's a crime drama. It's really been fun to do, but I really don't know what I want to do with that book at this point. Do I want to self-publish? Do I want to publish in the United States? Or do I want to go overseas and maybe publish in India, where my books have done well, and maybe get some traction there and have a better opportunity to publish here. So I'm like all over the place with this right now, but after 7 books and lots of sales, I guess I have that luxury.
So, one of the things that I took from what you said, Harry, I caught that you mentioned about the fish book where there were 5 things you changed and it made all the difference in the world. This is something that we don't get to ask people often. And so I'd love to get your take on it. Can you tell us, what are the things, even if it's just one, but what are the things you think that you notice or you seen, if you go back to that book or in general, that an author makes a mistake on that could be that difference maker? Because you mentioned that book was like, it just was missing these key ingredients. And so I'd love to know what, one of those ingredients might have been, whether it's the fish book or just in general.
Well, I think it crosses over. One of the mistakes I see professional speakers make, and I've learned this from Ken Blanchard, just remember you're there for the audience's benefit. They're not there for your benefit. And a lot of people in my industry, in business books, write for other business authors or consultants or professors. You have to write to the lowest common denominator. The mistakes that they made, simple one, the person that we feature in the book that learns the fish philosophy from the fishmongers was a divorced woman. And I said, guys, do you really think anyone cares about a divorced woman? And I'm not trying to be, hard on that. I said, if we make her a widow, what do I get instantly? Empathy. Suddenly, a widow with 2 kids, she was abandoned. I got them hooked. The second thing is, we're talking about a fish market where they throw fish. I says, we got to write the word pictures so you can smell the fish market in the book. The third thing, she had a great relationship with her boss. And I said, come on, get real. No one has a great relationship with their boss. Let's get a yin and yang. Let's get a push and pull with it. Let's have him be a detractor. Then the other thing was, she goes to the fish market, sees what the fishmongers are doing, goes back to her staff and says, I saw this, we're going to do this. No one is successful without a mentor. Bring a mentorship in from the fish market. So you could see how I am grabbing people into it. And then it was originally called Fish a Love Story. And because we have a romantic twist in it. And you always leave them hanging at the end. Those are the 5 things I did. And you could see how they could work with any book.
Wow.
And it really, it opened it up. I remember, because our literary agent, Margaret McBride, saw the original manuscript, and she, it's funny, Margaret's very expressive. Ugh, was her. And then I said, Margaret, this is what I'm going to take that book and do to it. She goes, and I remember in San Francisco at the American Society of Training and Development, standing in one of the aisles, I said, Margaret, if this is what I would do to that manuscript. They want me to be a co-author, and I named those 5 things. She goes, Harry, if you do that, I will rep your book. So little thing, it's the little things make a huge difference. And I think, Corey, to your point, grab them within the first few pages to make them care. Get them to care. Have them care.
Wow. Now, how about the parable side of things? Is that, because we go way back to like Og Mandino, who, I was just looking, I have a pile of Og's books. I have to go back and reread them again soon. But, those books were so brilliant, and he found a really unique market with the parable market. Just before you, we had Mark Sanborn on, who wrote The Fred Factor, another great parable book. the parable book, is it like a niche market? You know, I mean, obviously we know it did, you know, your book did okay. So we know that there's millions that can jump into it. But is it more of a niche market that likes a parable and gets drawn to it? Or do you think anybody in any audience can be drawn to it?
My bias is anybody could be drawn to it. The ones that seem to be, your audience is going to love this, the more educated you are, the less you like parables, is the feeling I get. But think about, I'm not being religious here, the Bible is all parable. We teach our kids through parable. We love stories. I do my speaking through stories. That's how we learn. That's how we relate. So I think that niche is still very much alive if it's a good parable. It has to be the parable that grabs you. And, you know, our book was accused of being Pollyanna. Well, 4.5 stars on Amazon and 6 million copies. Okay. What am I going to do? Make a book talking about a business strategy and make everyone fail? There has to be a certain degree of that in there. So I don't think it's dead at all. I think you have to get more clever. And you know, the business parable, Ken, when I talked to Ken back in the 80s and in the 70s when I actually met him, he said his idea for a business book was make it 1 chapter long, because he said no one reads more than 1 chapter of a business book. And he's probably right, because remember they were this thick.
Yeah.
So he said, and he said, I want to make it so anyone can read it on the shortest airline flight, because business people fly. And he said, parables we learn by parables. And I thought, boy, Ken, you know, you're not bad for a PhD. You're pretty smart.
It's amazing. It's so true. And so I guess then the other side, as far as the fish book, because a lot of people wouldn't maybe not necessarily know, especially if they weren't in business at the time, or maybe, you know, let's just say we have some people that could be in the millennial age and they may not have discovered it when it first came out as a video. But that video also was selling like crazy as well, wasn't it?
I believe it's the best-selling business video of all time. So yes, and it's funny, and Kelly probably knows this. You know, you come out with a book, you do a video. They came out with a video, we did a book. So it's kind of backwards. But think about that video, they couldn't print the copies fast enough. And it was back when it was a VHS. So I was, as the 3 authors, I was the one taking more of the marketing responsibility, especially at the time I was working at Blanchard. So I had that company behind me. You know, having the market seeded through a best-selling video gave me an edge. But you know how, I forget the guy's name who talks about tipping points?
Malcolm Gladwell?
Malcolm Gladwell. And there's always a tipping point. And one thing I don't believe in is burning bridges. And I had this contact that I almost burned this bridge because I didn't like the way he was treating Ken. And I did not burn the bridge. He was an editor, technical editor at Amazon. And he read the book and he calls me up out of the blue. He says, I love this book. He says, I'm going to send it over to Harry Edwards, the business book editor, and I'll have him do a review. And I think I can get you a PBM. And I'm thinking, what does a PBM mean? Pass buyer mailing. So what they did was Harry did the review. It was a positive review. So they sent out tons and tons of emails for free. It was great. When it was new, email marketing was very new in 2000, and they compared it to cheese, which, you know, they couldn't print cheese fast enough. Who Moved My Cheese? They said, if you like Who Moved My Cheese, you'll love fish. And this is the result of that day. And for a week, I hope you could see it. Wait a minute, I'm not good with this. See the sales ranking?
I can't. No, I can't see the finer details.
Number 1
on
Amazon for about a week. And what that does, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah, still on my wall. Because, hey, it's a bestseller. I got to read that book. And then we hit the Wall Street Journal business book bestseller list, stayed there for 6 years. And yeah, there you go.
I got that copy here as that part on the top.
Yeah, we've graduated to the New York Times bestseller list on the latest printing. So then we were Publishers Weekly, Business Week, Amazon, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. All those, when people see books at the top or near the top, they go, I must be missing something if I don't read this book. So I almost burned the bridge. I didn't. And it became the tipping point for the book that took it from selling, I don't know, 200 copies a week to selling 5,000 to 7,000 copies a week.
Wow.
And, going back to just those little things. Now, when we get a email marketing thing in our inbox, we're probably erasing as fast as we can.
So true.
New.
And I want to pass it over to Kelly with any questions she has as well. But I want to mention one quick thing off of what you just said there, Harry, as you mentioned the tipping point. And I never thought about it in that term, but Jack Canfield, I asked him, and I didn't use the word tipping point, but I said, what was that moment where you knew it was just like all of a sudden it was now going to get the momentum rolling down a hill? And he said what the big one was every day, which I think is a powerful message for authors. Him and Mark, Victor Hansen, did the rule of 5. So every day they did 5 things for the book before they did anything else to try to move it forward. And they did that for, I don't know, probably 10 years. But one of the things that Jack did one day is they reached out to Judge Ito during the O.J. Simpson trial to see if they could give a copy to every one of the jurors and one for Judge Ito. And the end result was the day that the verdict was being read, some of them walked out holding the book because it was the only thing they had with them. And one of the journalists said, what's this book you guys keep carrying? And the guy said, it's Mark, Victor Hansen, and Jack Canfield sent us signed copies so we'd have something to read during the trial. Boom.
Wow.
That was one of their tipping points, of course.
That was their pass-buyer mailing. A little bigger than mine, but see, it's just those little things. I remember when we did the 1 Minute Manager, Ken sent a copy to the president, Ronald Reagan, and he sent him a thank you letter back.
Wow.
But think about something you just said. Think about the titles. What is Fish? It's a business book, Fish. It piques your curiosity. The 1 Minute Manager. Wait a minute, I can manage in a minute. It's not what the book is about. Chicken Soup for the Soul. I'd have to say one of the best titles ever for a book, a self-help book. So sometimes, you can't judge a book by its cover, but it'll sure make you open it up.
I love it. And I never thought of that. And we had, as I mentioned, Mark Sanborn earlier, and the Fred factor. Your question probably is, who's Fred? Who's this Fred guy? I got to know him, obviously.
The mailman.
Yeah, but that's what it is. But I mean, you're probably going, who's Fred? When you read the title, and
right.
Robin Sharma, the leader who had no title. What do you mean? You don't need a title? You don't need to be CEO to be a leader? To your point, I as I'm looking at these titles, it makes you pose a question to yourself.
Exactly, and I think that's important. The Harvey. The guy who wrote Swim with the Sharks, Harvey McKay.
Yes. Yeah.
He did so much research. Another great title, Swim with the Sharks Without Being Eaten Alive. Everyone can relate to that in business. And he went through all the bookstores in his area in Minneapolis, looking at the business books on the shelves. And what he came up with, white stood out. So his background on the book is white. All these little things you pick up over the years, you think, it just might work. So, and I guess it goes back to there's really no set of criteria to guarantee, but you can do some things to give you a fair shot of getting some success with the book.
It's so true. We've been talking about today, Mark talked earlier about Wayne Dyer driving around to all the radio stations back in the day. And then I shared the story about James Redfield, who wrote Celestine Prophecy, and him and his wife Sally went around to 2,000 bookstores. And because the book was about synchronicity, he felt whoever was in the store at that time was meant to get a copy of the book. But it's easy to gloss over the fact that he went around to 2,000 bookstores. Like, he did something unique. And, he actually, to your point, like the Jack's Rule of Five, I mean, he was doing something unique to move that book forward that most people wouldn't have been willing to do at the time.
You're right. We did some very similar things with the book. I was lucky. I was able to get Ken to promote the heck out of it. But we went out there speaking. We went out there. We visited the publisher's distribution network. We visited the publisher's salespeople and spoke with them. We went all over doing what we could. We leveraged every contact we had. Mark Victor Hansen or Jack said the rule of five. I mean, really, it's the rule of infinity. You never, ever, ever stop. Some of my biggest kind of pleasures were seeing someone on an airplane reading my book. That's kind of cool. You walk over and go, "Hey, what are you reading?" I saw one guy in the Denver airport. He goes up to the counter. I happened to stand there, right? And he goes, "Do you have any good motivational books? I heard about this book." And it was, I forget what book he was talking about. And the lady goes, "Well, I've never read that." I said, "If you want a motivation book," I said, "this is the one." Because I was there to, sign some copies. And you're right. I went to every bookstore. I never passed by a bookstore without going in and signing copies. And he goes, "Really?" I go, "It's great. Your people are going to love it." He goes, "If you sign 50 copies, I'll buy them right now." I said, "My plane's not for an hour and a half. I'm sitting here." They had 50 copies on the shelf. Think about that. 50 copies of your book. And I stood there and I signed, personalized every one of them. Sold 50 right there. You never, ever, ever stop. Even today, I always keep them in the trunk of my car. And in the neighborhood here, we have the little free libraries. They're like little standalone little boxes this big. I'm always popping them in there.
I love that.
Oh, and my wife and I went on a river cruise on the Rhine. And what do you think I left in the library on the little ship or the little riverboat? A copy of my book. You never stop. I've left them in hotel rooms.
You know what's funny when you say that, Harry? This is one thing I did, and I same idea. I guess my head was that who knows who's going to discover it, but I had ordered a bunch of extra copies of my book, and so we have Value Village here. Which would be like Salvation Army, but basically it's a place where they carry used books that people donate from their home. And I put my own book in, like when we're donating stuff, I'll like layer 2 or 3 copies of my book in there. Same thing, because you never know who's going to discover it at that store.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we had a person heard about Fish Book, walked into the Mall of America, the Barnes and Noble in Minneapolis, and ordered 7,000 copies for every one of his staff.
Wow.
Yeah, if he was smart, he'd gone to the publisher, got him cheaper, but he did full boat on 7,000 copies.
Wow. You're happy though. I mean,
Yeah.
So, Kelly, like I said, I don't want to steal all of Harry's time. We have probably about 10 minutes left. So, here, Kelly, I want to pass it over to you to see if you have burning questions that you haven't had a chance to ask yet.
Well, I want to go back to the whole title thing because, I coach people to write their books, and one of the things that we talk about is, titles. And one of the things that I share with them is don't get so attached to your words that you're not willing to change them. And the other thing is too, you have to remember that they're not the book buyer, right? So one of the things that we do when we do our sessions is what we call hot or not. So, they'll say, "This is my title for my book." And then all the rest of the participants will say it's a hot title or it's not, right? And give them some suggestions on how to improve it. And my authors are just loving that because they realize, a lot of times we get so attached to our words or our titles And we're not the buyers. We want to get the feedback from our buyers.
I agree with you 100%, Kelly. We tend to want to write for ourselves. Fish was called a love story. Fish, a love story. They were worried it would, put it in romance or worse, cookbooks. That's why we worked really, and the subtitles are just as important as the titles. You're right. It's who is going to buy that book. And one thing I've noticed being a published author, the skin better get very, very thin, because the editors will tear you apart. The reviewers, the critics, they'll all tear you apart. And if you get feedback, sometimes it's worth taking a look into it, because, we title tested. I did for Ken Blanchard, wrote a book with Don Shula called Everyone's a Coach. Don Shula was a football coach. And I was part of the marketing of it and all, working with Ken. And I said, you got a really terrible title. And I told that to Ken Blanchard and Don Shula. And they go, no, it's not. I said, yes, it is. You know why? Because everyone's not a coach. I said, you guys are pouring your heart out to these people, letting them know what you've learned over the years that makes you who you are and good. I said, you're coaching from the heart. Now, they didn't listen to me, and the book didn't even do its earn back. Because wow. I don't know what you think, Kelly, but don't you think coaching from the heart's better than Everyone's a Coach?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I do too. And it's funny. I always when somebody says a line, even Harry, and I don't know if you're this way as an author, but I always go, that would be a good title. Like, that's where my head goes. So Kelly said something earlier. I told her, I said, that'd be a good title. The Dishes Can Wait. And about a story she was telling about how it's easy for us to get tied up and say we don't have enough time to do this and that. But she had a coach or a speaker recently say to her, we're making time for one thing, but you're making this a priority and you're not making that a priority. But you could switch that if you wanted. So he said, you're making the dishes a priority and the dishes can wait. And I was like,
that's a great title. And I bet, Kelly, you spend a lot of time with your authors on the subtitle.
Yeah, the subtitle and the title, right? And I agree. Like, I remember my second book was going to be called How to Gain Confidence. And then one of the other girls in the group said, Cal, what do you think about self-esteem doesn't come in a bottle? And I'm like, that's it. And that became the title of my book, Self-Esteem Doesn't Come in a Bottle. And then people would say to me, well, what about an alcohol bottle? And I'm like, yeah. Some people think that they can get drunk or have a few drinks and then they're confident. That gives them temporary liquid courage, but it doesn't give them self-esteem.
Right.
But the thing is, I got hired so many times to speak at women's conferences because, how to gain confidence or how to gain self-esteem is boring. But self-esteem doesn't come in a bottle. Okay, what is that about? I want to know.
Exactly. It's just those little tiny things that make such a huge difference. And, the curiosity. I've had books where the titles were changed and I lost arguments. Like, we did a book, Who Kidnapped Excellence. Mm-hmm. And I love that book. It was the most fun book I've ever done, writing wise. And it's Who Kidnapped Excellence? Well, average kidnapped excellence. And it was written as a crime drama, and it was all personified, and it came out really good, and it didn't do well. Because I pushed and pushed and pushed. I said, it's okay to leave it as a crime drama, creating a culture of excellence. That's what we're trying to do with this book. That should be the title. But I was outvoted by my co-authors and the publisher. Yep. Sometimes they listen to me, Corey.
So now to go back to fish for a second, I don't want to bring us back to fish just because it's the main one we started talking about, but I actually wanted to talk to you about it, Harry, because you guys did, what would you call it? Almost like supplemental books to the main fish book?
3.
Yeah. And so what was the thought of two-part to that. What was the thought process there? But maybe bigger, because this is always the thing I always wonder about, is how did those books do? Because, you know, it's always like everything, right? You have the main movie, and then the sequels, sometimes it's a little bit harder to recreate that same thing you had on that first one because it was such a big new thing. So how did those do, or what are your thoughts on those?
Okay. Well, the first book, you know, Fish is doing great, and the publisher said, "Do you have anything else?" And they had just finished a video called Fish Sticks, how to keep fish alive in an organization. So we did a parable on that, and we're starting to work on it. The publisher actually made an offer on the book. And I said, you know, besides that, we've collected so many great stories of how people have used fish. And I think that might be a book project. When we told that to our editor, his eyes lit up. He goes, that's the second book. And we did Fish Tales, Tales.
Oh, yeah.
And then we did Fish Sticks. Those books did, I want to say probably, each of those probably did over 1 million copies each. So we were very, very lucky. Then they said, you know, publishers, what's next? And what happened is once we, when the Fish book became a bestseller, one of my co-author's daughter was killed by a drunk driver. And he felt the need to write a book that included something like that in it. And we did Fish for Life. And it wasn't, I think the publisher knew it wasn't going to be a great book because it was a little maudlin. And we did it anyway. And they paid us a fortune for it, which surprised me. And it only sold probably to this day, maybe 75,000 copies. But my co-author felt great about it. So to answer your point, 6 million, 1 million, 1 million. And you're right, they will get progressively. We're not going to do a 5th Fish book.
Right. Yeah, and I'm just always curious about that because that's a market that few people talk about. But and to that point, still though, of course, you guys still did exceptionally well. You know, over 1 million copies sold is, what does that put you in, like the less than 1% of authors as far as a single book sales?
I don't think about that much, but probably better than that.
Yeah, well, I mean,
of course I don't think about it, right?
I'm being generous in saying 1%, right? I mean, but the point is, they still did. If you compared them to any other book, they still did exceptionally well, and so that's still really cool. And then, as you mentioned, the drop-off book. I mean, I don't know, but probably the publisher also probably thought, well, you know, these guys have done exceptionally well for us, and one of your co-authors felt very passionately about that book. That's probably a big part of why they want to publish it as well, I would think.
It really was. And I was fine with it. I even contemplated not even being part of it. But yeah, they don't do as well as the first, but think about the 1 Minute Manager, the 1 Minute Salesperson, the 1 Minute Parent, the 1 Minute Father, 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey, the Leadership in the 1 Minute Manager. Ken took that to new levels.
Oh, he froze again.
So we'll let Harry come back, but yeah, I mean, that's oh, there we are.
Oh,
We got Harry.
there I am.
Yes.
Yeah. There you are. Oh, again.
I was just going to add that what Harry was saying there as well about we got him back here.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. You know, Ken took that to new levels, but he had a very strong marketing company behind it. Mm-hmm. And he was always able to sell books that way. But they dropped off, putting the 1 Minute Manager to work probably sold 10% of what the 1 Minute Manager sold.
And I think that's got to be the norm, right? I mean, like, even Chicken Soup for the Soul, look how deep that is. But I'm pretty sure Chicken Soup for the Golfer Soul didn't sell as much as Chicken Soup for the Soul.
I only think that first book, you know, but they created their own little kiosk in a bookstore. I mean, as an author and a strategist, Kelly, we can only dream of stuff like that.
Yeah.
They did okay.
Yeah.
So Harry, as we bring things to a close and wind things down, one of the things I want to ask you, and you've been so gracious, so giving. I mean, you've covered so much and followed us on the path, because we like to do like a coffee type conversation. But one of the big things I'm curious about is, what do you have? Do you have something that's coming up in the future you can share with us? Something you have planned? Are you working on something now? And then, of course, the most important part is, how can people learn more about your work and all the great stuff you're doing?
Okay. Well, my next project is that who pardon accountability, and we're going back and forth, embracing accountability versus who pardon accountability. So we're struggling with the title right now. That's the next. The manuscript is done. We're just trying to figure out what to do with it. And anytime anybody wants any information about me, all they have to do is go to harrythefishguy.com. harrythefishguy.com, and that's my website. And it's everything you ever wanted to know about me. Unless you ask my wife. I'm sure she has other stories.
Awesome. Well, maybe that'll be the next interview, Harry. But Harry, this has been an absolute pleasure. I'm a huge fan, and I knew from our past interviews that you were going to be amazing and share. You're so open. You're one of those people that's so full disclosure, which I think helps so many other authors, because they don't hear the true numbers. They don't hear the true book world all the time. So to hear that, I think, helps set them up properly. So I just thank you. I'm in awe, and I appreciate you, and I honor you for coming on and doing this today.
My pleasure. And, anytime we get the opportunity to do something like this, Corey, let's take advantage of it. And Kelly, it was a pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, it's great meeting you too, Harry. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you, my friend. We'll let you run and bring you back on in the future.
All righty. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks. So, wow. Amazing, Kelly. Like I think you probably knew it would be such great insight. And like I said, I love the fact that he's always so open about things in terms of true numbers. I mean, how many people do we bring on? And it's not a knock on anybody. I mean, just people usually don't talk numbers, but that'll tell you, this is how many this book sold, this is how many this book sold, and it gives you a point of reference. Like I said, we don't get to ask that question often of what usually happens when somebody writes this big monumental book. What if the next one? What happens there? And I think here's the thing. When they write such a big monumental book and it sells so well, I think the publisher and everybody all the way down knows it's probably not going to sell as well the next one. But it sold so exceptionally well, even selling a tenth of it is probably exceptional. So selling 6 million copies is rare. That's a rare book that sells that. But as we just said, selling 1 million is still less than 1%. So I'm pretty sure that publisher, when they published the Fish Tales and it sold over 1 million copies, they weren't crying. They were still happy.
Yeah, I'd be happy with even $1 from each one of those books. So.
And then here's the thing. He said there's 4 books in the overall series, and he said the last one sold 75,000. So the publisher may or may not have broke even on that one. But even if it's the same publisher, they're still going to look and say 3 out of 4 books, we sold 8 million copies combined. So we're still okay, and we'll take that one that sold 75, even to look at the fact that maybe work with this author again, and they'll sell a bunch of books for us. Like, again, I don't think you're going to see that publisher saying, well, we didn't have much of success with them. The last book sold 75,000. They're going to say we sold 8,075,000 and counting.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's why the publisher will do it, is because, so I think the false narrative is we're looking at that first book and going, well, it didn't meet that one again, but it almost never does. But that one was and I'll go to Celestine, right? I think it's about 30 million copies now. So 30 million copies, and I never asked James, so I'm not going to say, I'm just going to guess. But if the next 10th Insight sold 3 million copies, that publisher's still going to be happy, because how many authors do they have that sell 3 million copies?
Exactly. I totally agree with you. And, it was really interesting talking to him about, because he's always been with a publisher, what he's going to do with his next book. Mm-hmm. So that's what I found fascinating too. Is he going to self-publish, or is he going to go right back to the publisher, or go to India and publish it there? It's interesting having to make those kind of decisions also.
100%. Yeah. I mean, it's so great to hear that, it's so great to hear somebody be so open about that. And then also, to your point, demonstrate to us that the book business is changing. I mean, I won't say names, but I can tell you I know at least 5 publishers that have sold, sorry, at least 5 authors rather, who've sold over 1 million copies that right now are on the fence as to whether or not they're going to go with a publisher or on their own for the next book. At least 5, and that have sold over 1 million. So you think about it, and here's the thing. A lot of people don't know this, but if you sell 100,000 copies of a self-published book, you're probably going to make more money than if you sell 1 million copies with a publisher.
Absolutely. Well, and the thing is, nowadays, it's just so easy to sell on the internet. And the thing is, authors, this is one of the things that I suggest with my authors, is that you want the customer. Whereas if you just send people to a bookstore to buy your book, or you send them directly to Amazon to buy your book, you don't know who's buying your book. So if you build your email list and you build your platform, that way when you have a next book coming out, you know who's buying your books, you're able to then go and publish or promote your next book to them. And so I think that's why a lot of like the authors you're telling me about that, have sold over 1 million copies are thinking, hey, if I have 1 million people on my email list, then the next time when I go to do my next book, I can count on, say, 10% of them buying. And there's 100,000 copies sold right there.
No,
and
you're
they'll
exactly.
make $10 a book versus under $1.
Yeah, 100%. And then on top of that, they get to retain their copyright. They get to retain which is a huge thing, is the editing of the book. So in some cases when they're going with a big publisher over and over again, as Harry just told us, right? He wanted to keep the title a certain way, and he was the main author in that book, and it still got changed.
Right.
And so again, to that point, you might want to retain that stuff. Well, if you self-publish, you get to choose when it's being released. You can release it in a week rather than waiting 2 years. You can say, I'm not going to change that. Sorry, I want it to be written the exact way I wrote it, et cetera, et cetera. So you get a lot of flexibility. So I think it depends on what they're looking for. And then I think we're going to probably see some major authors go back and forth too. Sometime they'll do a book that's a passion project that they want to retain all those decisions. And then they might say, this book needs to reach more people and I don't have the distribution, so I'm going to go with a publisher. And they, when they've sold those kind of books, they have the ability to do that. But then back to that point, yeah, I think it's really cool to have somebody who's in it so deeply also be so open in sharing it.
Yeah, absolutely, because those are real world decisions that people need to make as to whether they go with a publisher or self-published. And it's interesting because I also get, people saying to me, oh, I decided, because I know they want to write a book, and they'll say, oh, I decided I'm going to go with a publisher. And it's like, oh, I'm going to go get an agent. And I'm like, okay, good luck. No problem, right? Because I also know that some of them don't have any kind of social media following, and yet they think that they're going to get picked up by a publisher, by an agent, and they don't understand how difficult it can be to make those things happen, right? We do hear those success stories of people who, do it, but they're very few and far between.
Absolutely. Well, I want to bring our next guest on, but I'm going to just finish one quick thing you said there, Kelly, is, when you said that, the person says to you, you know what, I'm not going to go your route. I'm just going to go get a publisher, traditional way. And they're, I'm just going to go with HarperCollins. That's basically what you're saying. Well, I'll use that cliche we always say, easier said than done. Or go one step further and say, that's easy for you to say, my friend, because the truth is it was never easy to get with HarperCollins or a big publisher. I mean, it's one thing if you have a national story or you're already a cemented brand that people are lauding after. If you're a Kardashian, you can pretty much have your pick of a publisher. But it's easy to say that in general, but it's never been easy to get a big, the big 4 to 6 publishers. It's harder now than it's ever been. So When I hear somebody say that, they'll say, well, it's just like I want to land my TEDx talk. I want to deliver it in May. And it's March now. Well, sorry, you're already, like they say, I want my video out in May. Sorry, you're already at 8 months behind. Like you should have started 8 months ago if you want your video out in 2 months. It's the same thing. Like somebody say, I can't wait for my book to get out. Everybody needs to read it right now. I'm going to go with a publisher. Well, even if you're lucky enough to get a publisher, that's going to take a year probably for you to land a publisher, the right one, with a big distribution. Then you're looking at, as Harry just said, and Mark said earlier, 2.5 years, it's going to be on the shelf. So even if you're that one of those few that can land that publisher and you have all the right things in the right place, you're looking at 3.5 years probably from the day you say that until your book reaches the market. So again, to your point, Kelly, I think it's just important for people to know what that real world is like. So I'm glad we dived deep into there with Harry and in general. And on that note, that'll be, I don't know why that's a segue. That's not really a segue. But on that note, that segue is the segue I'm going to use to bring on our next guest. So Gerald, Carriere, the wild woman. So excited today. And Jer, you probably see what we do. We typically get the guests to tell us a little bit about themselves before we dive in. But I know you have a unique perspective on both the publishing industry and as an author. So can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yes. So, of course, I like to start off all my talks by saying that I am Indigenous. And the reason why I like to say that is because, you know, the women and people who have come before me weren't allowed to be Indigenous. So it's really important for me to acknowledge that and to, you know, just make it known that I'm coming from that perspective. And, you know, it's funny because when I say this around the world, you know, I speak in Europe and all over the place and people are like, what is that, right? And basically it's sort of like an American Indian, but it's a Canadian Indian, right? And we don't call ourselves Indian, we call ourselves Indigenous. So that's what that's all about. I'm originally from a very small community in Saskatchewan, which is called Cumberland House. It is one of the first fur trade posts. It's the biggest man-made marsh in the world. And again, it has a lot of history, right? But again, I didn't grow up there. I grew up mostly in the city. My background is in human resources, learning and development mostly. I worked for a period of time for CBC News in Regina, and of course, just a bunch of different documentary host stuff. And then, of course, I'm doing what I'm doing now, which is working with my publisher as both a publishing consultant and international speaker. And of course, I'm also a recording artist. So I like to call myself a serial entrepreneur, which is somebody that is, you know, a founder and CEO of my own company, a author, speaker, coach, recording artist, stylist, movement choreographer. And the newest thing is I'm actually being considered for a Juno Award right now. And actually am working on the Jer Carriere show. So.
Wow.
I know.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that's you're on fire. And I love that. That's just, it's awesome. I love hearing stories of people reaching for the stars. And I just, you know, I've watched some of your journey and I know you're that person. So thank you for sharing that with us because it's so cool to see, like I say, somebody who's like me in the sense that I'm a multi-passionate. You know, I'm always doing different things and I don't make apologies for it. And I don't think you do either. So yeah, I love that you've embraced that. So there's so many places we could go from there. But I think the first place I'd like to go is, can you tell us, you know, since you talked about having those different, we'll call it artistic avenues and adventures, does that affect the way that you wrote your book and you write in general, do you think? Like, does that play a part in how you write?
Definitely. I think that, you know, when people say, you know, well, who are you or what is like your it thing? I would definitely say that if I were to give up everything, the two biggest things that I would be is a writer and then a performer, a vocalist, right? So, and those go hand in hand, right? But definitely like, okay, so I'm going to backtrack way back into the day because I mean, of course, being a young person, I went through a lot of you know, hardships, traumas, different things, and that really attributed to me even writing in the first place, because for me, writing was a form of therapy, right? So Wild Woman actually stemmed from a entry that I did, and it's really interesting. Do you guys want to hear it? Just so you can kind of get an idea. I kept it just in case. So this is the piece. I come from a line of wild women, a line of broken dreams and promises, with sand in their eyes as they cried and blood pulsing out of their wounds. Wild women, hopeless and wild, torn but not defeated, defiant and without, dirty but not spoiled. I come from these women strong like fire, soft like water with captivating beauty, their souls like whispers and their hearts like thunder. They breathe through me, as if to support me and who I am to become. With all their hopes and dreams set along with mine, we are wild women. We cannot be tamed. So even to this day, when I read this, I'm like, who was that girl who wrote this, right? So even to be in the place that I am now, and that was maybe 12, 15 years ago that I wrote this piece. And that is what stemmed the writing, the music, the artistry, the fashion. And basically it was, there's sides of ourselves that we, neglect, sacrifice, compromise. And it was really important for me to give light and give a voice to that girl that I kind of left in the past and said, no, be quiet. Nobody wants to hear that, right? And when I say I am a wild woman, I'm speaking to the women who have, sacrificed their wants and desires and dreams, my bloodline. And now that I'm here, they had to be silenced and be appropriate and weren't able to speak and do things that they wanted to. And so now it's my turn, and, each of their steps, it's my turn. I'm at the precipice. And, what am I going to be? Am I going to be, quiet and small? I'm like, heck no, I'm going to be wild. Right. So, yeah. So definitely my artistic side comes out. It's, when it's in your veins, you can't help it. Right. So, yeah.
I love that because I think it's easy for us to forget who paved the way. Whatever that part of our life is, right? Like, me, you hear me a lot talk about this book was the first book I ever read. It's because these authors paved the way for me to be a writer. In far as I'm concerned, like first book I read was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And he's a masterful storyteller. And I didn't read my first book until 27, 28. And so as far as I'm concerned, he paved the way for me to be able to write, because if I hadn't read that book, I might never have read a book, and I might not be writing today. And he started, 1937, he was writing that classic book. And so, I think we run a big risk if we forget who paved the way. You're talking in maybe a much more bigger sense in terms of paving the way, but just in general, I think it's easy for us to forget that, but it's important we never do. Absolutely. Because somebody had to blaze this path when it wasn't easy to blaze this path.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so I love that you embrace that, but also that it's a catalyst for everything you've done since. Here's a question I have, because I thought this is where you're going when you said, who was that girl that wrote that? Are you a type of person when you're writing? So now I'm speaking this now from a songwriting perspective, but I feel like it's probably my writing as well. But if I write a song, let's say, I can write a song. I haven't written in a while, but if I sit down and write a song, I can write a song in 6 minutes. That's a 5-minute song and all the lyrics done. And I almost go, how did that get written? Like, I don't even remember rhyming words. I've written songs that feel like they're work and I'm rhyming words. But for the most part, when I write a song that ends up being a song on my CD, it's a song that it's just like, I'm doing it fast. I'm recording it because I'm talking faster than I could write it. And yet somehow it's rhyming. Somehow the words all make sense. Are you that type of writer, or are you a writer who sits down and has an outline and says, now I'm going to write?
I feel like the more rules and like structure that I put on myself, I can't be creative. Like, I feel like most of the things that I've written were when I was in a very emotional state or a very, reactive state. That's when the beauty actually comes out of me, right? And so, I wrote in another chapter book, for the first time, and I look at that chapter and I'm like, who is that, right? Because honestly, and I'm very spiritual, so I'm going to say things that are wild and it's just who I am. But honestly, like, I feel like I'm just being channeled through, and I'm like, how do I know that? Like, I'm a 36-year-old girl, and it's just, how do I know the stuff that I know, and how am I able to communicate it so eloquently? And that's probably one of the things that, being an artist, being a writer, you don't always understand why you're writing things the way you do. You just have to allow it to come and just embrace that, you are gifted, if you will.
Well, and you answered that question for me perfectly, because that's the situation that I have been in every time I've written something, where I'm like, how did I write that? And it's funny because it's helped me a little bit, because I always look at like somebody like Bob Dylan, for example, arguably, I don't even know if it's arguable, but let's say arguably one of the best songwriters of all time. And then you go like, is he that much of a genius level person? Like, is he that much above us intellect wise? Or is he channeled? Has he been channeled at that level of intellect? Because I've written songs that, again, I don't remember, like, when they're happening, I'm like, how are these words coming out of me? And then it's written and I'm like, do I have that intellect, or did somebody channel me through that? So it's interesting you say that, because I've experienced that a lot, where I mean, I feel like we have to have some capacity to write it and intellect for it.
Mhm.
But yeah, you look at it and go, how did I put that together? Could I recreate that now 5 minutes from now? And like I said, I mean, I look at some of these songwriters and I'm like, this person must have been a genius to write something like that. And then again, it goes back to the point of, or do they have a high intellect, curiosity, are they very artistic and creative, and they also were channeled to get the song out to the world or writing it to the world. So it sounds like you've experienced some of that as well.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's interesting because I mean, we all have, you know, our weaknesses and our strengths. I know for me, like I actually had to hire a music composer to put the songs together for me. I was basically like, these are the words. I want it to sound like this. And, you know, when she put it together for me, I was like, what? Like, because for me, it's so hard, like everything is compartmentalized, right? So if I were to like, I have, you know, pianos and guitars and all the different things, but if I were to try, I always hear something else. So it was really challenging for me to, you know, do that process. I have words, I just don't have melodies, right? So the thing is, you know, that production, it takes a lot of people, right, to have this book, this CD. Like, I mean, this is one of my biggest accomplishments this year, is to have my album on vinyl record like that, you know. But this took many people, and people don't, you know, it's just like, oh, I'm playing a song on Spotify and it's free, and it's like a lot of people go into these things and a lot of time gets invested. And I honestly feel like, you know, genius isn't a person, it's a place, right? So it's your job to put yourself in those positions to be able to, you know, really be able to express that side of yourself, if that makes sense.
It so does. And as a off-air side note, remind me to circle back and ask you about the process of putting that onto a record, because my last CD, it's been a while, but my last CD is 2014 released, and I'm planning to start working on the next one in the next year. I mean, the song's been written for a long time, but I'd love to put the last CD that I did on vinyl. And so I just haven't explored that yet. So I might talk to you because it'll save me learning some of the process probably.
Of course.
I love that. I love vinyl. Like, I mean, I'm looking across from you right here, and I have vinyl. I'm in my office right now, and I have probably 50 records here, and then I don't know, 2,000 at home. So
we have very similar tastes.
Yes, absolutely, right behind me here. Yeah, and so anyway, I love that you put the album onto vinyl. So. Going a little bit further into the author side of things, what made you decide to want to become an author? Like, was there a different catalyst than the performer and the other traits, or was it all part of the same?
So I feel like this is a really big question that kind of got me to the point. But if I were to like pinpoint the idea of kind of how it happened was, again, you know, I was going through a bunch of stuff, both, you know, health-wise, and again, you know, dealing with, you know, mindset and depression, anxiety, all the different things. And I was actually in university at the time. And like I said, I have books and journals and boxes of these things that I wrote, right? It was my therapy. And so I was writing one evening, and a friend of mine came up to me and, what are these things, right? And so I was reading to them, and they were like, those are brilliant. You know, you need to put those together and somebody's going to publish them. Someone needs to hear those, right? And I'm like, really? You know, really? And it was just literally that, right? Somebody seeing something inside of me, and I'm like, okay, cool. And again, just my background has always been, you know, in high school, I was the kid that was always asking inappropriate questions, and, well, what about this? And how about that? And, you know, that annoying kid that everyone's like, shut up, we want to go home now, right? But, you know, leaving that space, I always kind of knew that I was going to do great things. And, you know, I would tell people, I'm going to be a lawyer, then I'm going to be a judge, then I'm going to be the first female Indigenous Prime Minister of Canada, right? And I say this all over the world, and people clap for that. And I'm like, people like politics. It's insane to me. But anyways, so I've always had something to say, you know? And so again, just doing the different things that I did, you know, being a reporter for the news, you know, being in human resources, everybody like loves you if you're doing what they want you to, right? So again, I realized very young, you know, of course I, you know, explored politics and all the different things like that. It wasn't really the position that attracted me. It was the influence and the power to impact people. So through going through the different careers and professions that I went through, I just realized that nobody wanted to say and do things the way that I wanted to. And I'm very rebellious, and I'm like, I want to do it my way, right? And I realized, very young that I was very entrepreneurial spirited. So it was the only way, honestly, to say things the way that I want to. And even the chapter in our book is very controversial, but I do that on purpose, because I like to, rattle chains and just change the status quo. So.
No, I love that. Well, and your book, now it's going to be released in the spring, I believe?
Yes. So yeah, we're in editing right now. So we should be published late summer, late spring or early summer. So it's exciting. It's been a long journey.
And now I might be going by memory here incorrectly. I mean, I retained a lot of stuff in this little tank, but do I remember correctly? Did you spend some time in the publishing business as well?
Yes. Yeah. So I actually work for my publisher. So that is also another amazing opportunity. My book is called Wild Woman: Master the Art of Pride, Presence, and Productivity. So you can kind of see the promo stuff here. And so, yeah, absolutely. What happened was, again, I was working here in Edmonton and was working for a different women's organization doing, essential skills and employment training. And that day, I actually got fired from my job and was driving over to the publishing event. And, it was Friday night, you're all distraught. You're like, what's happening? And then it was the first night of attending this event. I was just like, I don't even know why I ever worry. It was just like literally everything that I had done in my life basically just fell on my lap, and it was like, this is what you're supposed to be doing. So it was amazing. Of course I had to earn my way. I had to earn, my publishing, because it's an entrepreneurial publisher, not a traditional publisher. So it's very against the grain thinking. Not a lot of people will get the concepts, but I'm sure you understand, using a book as a marketing tool. And I mean, it's been life-changing for me. So
I want to ask you a couple of questions there, if you don't mind, around that, because, and I'm with Morgan James Publishing, which I've often said is kind of between, it's basically as close as you can get to a traditional publisher without having to give up all your rights, is the best way I can say it. Like, I have to give up my copyright. They're a very entrepreneurial publisher. For I don't think it's like 7 years, they've been voted the fastest growing publisher in North America. They have 5 locations. I think they're like a $20 million a year company. So we're not talking a small outfit. They are large, and they have all the same benefits and bonuses as a traditional publisher. So I get it totally. My question is around that, though. Can you give us a couple of hints you've learned from the entrepreneurial perspective, being a publisher versus traditional publishing? Things that what I'm getting at is maybe somebody who's looking at being a self-published author who's just learning the business altogether. Are there a couple of things you learn that work really well or help move the needle for people with their books?
Well, again, because there's a couple of things that I want to talk about here, because of course, I myself, I travel the world and I help people build their businesses and write their books, right? So Kelly and I will have a lot of the same type of conversations, but one of the things that I find a lot is that people are always so fixated on the book. And because my background is in marketing and communications, and like, people don't realize that it's 20% the book and 80% marketing, right? And the other thing about this is, there's so much like of the, age old, preacher type stuff. It's like, this is, we're identifying the problem, we're identifying the issue, but we're not really giving any solutions, right? We're not being active. It's more being in a reactive state with everything. And so what I always encourage with, the people that I work with is, once you have the objective of what it is that you're trying to accomplish with the book, it's then moving your focus to being the marketing, building a buzz, really putting yourself there, being a leader and being a face of this movement that you're trying to teach people about. So you really have to choose something that you want to be known for, right? I'm sure, when people hear Wild Woman, they think it's like this wild, ferocious girl that, runs in the bush, but actually it's about being feminine and soft and vulnerable and being, really loving in the world where everyone wants to beat you up and be mean and all this stuff, right? So again, you have to be willing and open to be the face of what it is that you're trying to elicit and into the world, right? And then, of course, I'm sorry, what was the question? I lost my train of thought.
What you've seen are some ways to move the needle based on being an entrepreneurial publisher.
Right. And then the other thing, so going back to the second part, which was, providing solutions, a lot of, when people think, I want to write a book, and I always, again, push people because, that's what I'm really good at, is I always suggest that, okay, so yes, 100%, this is this amazing idea. This is great content. How are you going to provide solutions for people? Because it's very important to identify that, we're trying to paint people's pain island. And we want to also say, hey, there's pleasure island, and you are the bridge to get them there. Right. So you have to, whether it's starting a business, whether it's, bringing more leads and clients to your business, you have to build a solution to people's problems. So that is going to require a lot more accountability, responsibility, and for you to really show up in that genre that you're trying to impact people with. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. It made me think immediately, like whenever I was working on my own book, that I'll say my latest of my own books, the book of why and how. The idea is to help people find their why, so their purpose, their calling, but then also not just leave them there. Then, okay, what do I do with it now? I found it. Well, the pain, island, if you will, is people saying I'm purposeless. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my life. I feel unhappy all the time. I'm unfulfilled. I don't know why. The pleasure island is, here's what it can feel like if you have that fire in your belly and you know what you're called to do. And me and the book, hopefully, is the bridge in between them. So, just to kind of put a visual on what you just said, I love that. And, I guess the other side to that is, we had, when you mentioned about the marketing side being so important, and yet it's the part that a lot of people leave behind. When I think about it, just today alone, we've had 2 guests on before you who combined have sold over 10 million books. And yet we I'm going to say rarely in both those interviews talked about what's inside the books. In fact, Kelly had to bring us back because with the Fred Factor, the first one, I didn't even explain what the book was about. And Kelly brought it up like 10 minutes left in the interview. And with the other one, Fish, we talked a little bit about what the book was about. But really, at the end of the day, he talked about how he changed the book because he felt there were 5 things wrong with it. And he said, if these 5 things were changed, I think this book could do well. But if we look at the 5 things, it's still marketing. Because what he said was, for instance, in the Fish book, the main character was divorced. And he said, that's good. But he said, what if she was a widow? Then we would have more empathy. Then we would be more pulled in. And so it sounds like it's a writing thing, but it's a marketing thing because he said, we'll have empathy from the reader. So that's about marketing to the reader. So he changed 5 things that he said, these will be more reader friendly. And if you think about then you're not saying, okay, this is going to make the story better. You're saying this is going to make the story more relatable to the reader, which to me is marketing.
Yes.
And that's the closest we talked about the writing side of it, whereas most of it was about what were the unique things you did. And so one of the things that you might have heard it because I know you were on backstage, but one of the things that Harry talked about is somebody at Amazon was an editor and he wanted to tell him off because he wasn't treating Ken Blanchard, who Harry was working for, that well. But he didn't. He fought the urge. And then that guy ended up sending an email, like through Amazon, like an Amazon email out to a whole bunch of people and said, you got to check out this new book. And he said that was the tipping point in the book. Well, the point of that, again, is that's all marketing. And so he built the relationship and focused on the marketing. I mentioned Jack Canfield, him and Mark Victor Hansen with Chicken Soup for the Soul. Every day they did a rule of 5, which meant every day they did 5 things before they started doing anything else to market the book. And so I love, and I hope people are getting that from today too, Jer, is how important marketing is. When those 3 I mentioned combined, if you had in Chicken Soup for the Soul, we're talking like, we're getting close to 1 billion copies sold because Chicken Soup for the Soul is almost that on its own. And if you look at how all 3 of those book series or those authors involved made those books hit the numbers they did, it was all about marketing first.
Absolutely.
So I'm just glad you mentioned. No, I'm just glad you mentioned that. That's how important I think it is. That's my validation of what you said. Is that's how important I think the marketing side is.
Well, and I mean, I want to take that a little bit further because a lot of the people that I coach and speak to, even just regular people that are trying to build their business and get more leads and clients and just even bring awareness to whatever it is that they're talking about. I tell people, like social media is a beast. It's like a dog, right? You have to feed your dog, let's just say 3 times a day. You got to take it out for a walk, whatever it is. You have to treat your book as your business. And it's like a lemonade stand. I always say this over and over again. It's insane. But it's like a lemonade stand, right? Like you have your lemons, you have your juice, you have your sugar. It's Saturday, you're sitting out on the curb and you're waiting for all these people to come. If you don't tell anybody about it, who's going to come? Who's going to buy your book, right? So again, it's something that you have to consistently do, right? So when I wake up in the morning, you know, the thing that I feel like really made me effective and get my message out the most was, you know, I had a business coach at the time. She suggested that you need to do Facebook Live. So I started doing Facebook Lives Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays every day, no matter my mood, no matter whatever it was. I came on camera and I just spoke, right? And that was literally what got me the speaking engagements. That's what got people, because the thing is, people don't realize you need to feed the beast, we'll call it, 3 times a day. Now, the beautiful thing about Facebook Lives is that you can repurpose this thing, right? You can make it into blogs, you can make it into podcasts, you can make it in, little blips. So when I would do a live, I would repurpose it on LinkedIn, Instagram, Snapchat, and we have TikTok now, we have Clubhouse, like it's brilliant, right? So, and people don't realize to create content, it is a full-time job, right? Even on Instagram, I'm posting, 3 to 5 times a day, Facebook, Instagram, it's insane, but you have to do that. You have to, people don't realize that you need to have touched people at least 7 times before they start to register. Oh, what's this girl talking about? I always see her on here. Maybe I should take a listen, right? And again, there's lots of different elements that come into this, right? There's the history of, generations and how they consume and gather and get motivated by information, right? So it's really important for each individual to understand who it is they're trying to serve and to be on those flat platforms in order to serve your community or your readers or your listeners or whomever it is. That is your responsibility as a leader. So, yeah.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because one of the things that I hear, and I notice it go up and down depending on if I'm doing Blue Talk stuff, but people commenting, sending me like, this is private message, not something they're saying publicly, but dude, I see you everywhere. You're all over the place. And but to your point, you have to be. But I will say, if you know how to do it effectively, you don't have to be doing it all day, every day. Mm-hmm. So you have to be everywhere all the time, but you don't have to be, because some people take that to the point where I have to be on 24/7. And to back that up, I get notifications and I got to turn it off, but I haven't yet. With Clubhouse, for instance, and I have certain friends of mine that I just, every hour, it's like, so-and-so just started a new Clubhouse thing. So like, it tells me they're just always on. And so, I bet you if you look at them versus somebody like yourself or myself in a year's time, they probably won't be any further in terms of, what would you call it, exposure than us, or somebody doing less work but still everywhere all the time. So I don't think you have to always be on to be everywhere all the time, if that makes sense.
And it's prioritizing your time, right? So like you said, he comes on 5 times a day, he does these things to promote the work. So yeah, like in the morning, I get up, I do my Facebook Live, and then I commit, maybe an hour or so to creating content and delivering that content. After that, like then I, focus on the book or the business or the publishing or the music or whatever it is, right? So again, you do have to be strategic in that, but it is crucial to you really delivering that message, right? So.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, it is, you said the key thing, it is a full-time job. So I'm not even saying that, you can come on and do this in 15 minutes and be everywhere all the time. But I love what you said about, and this is another takeaway for people, about repurposing, because it makes me think of Brendan Burchard. And for those that know Brendan Burchard, I mean, the guy for the last 10 years has been everywhere. And everybody seems to know who Brendan is. And, he went on Clubhouse, and I just saw the other day, I think he has like 70,000 followers. And Clubhouse is how new? It's just, he's everywhere all the time. But what he does, which I think is brilliant, is he records like a 1-hour thing. This is what he said I signed up for one of his programs. He said for an hour he records, let's say the first of a week. And then his staff take that and they turn it into like 5 minutes a day video. The full hour, let's say, on his YouTube channel. And then he might have 5-minute clips on Facebook. And then they take quotes from what he did and put that into image quotes. Now, yes, he has somebody doing it, but the point is all he committed was an hour.
Yeah, exactly.
That's like as far as creating. He created 1 hour and they repurposed it for a week. Now, if he wanted, he could do it all himself. It's just that it would take him probably an hour a day. Now he has somebody else who's spending the hour a day doing it. But the takeaway from people should be he was able to create one thing and use it multiple places.
Yes, absolutely. And again, going back to this, I didn't really realize this up until this conversation right now. But my album, for instance, each song that's on the album is a different genre of music, right? Because everybody asks, what kind of music do you sing, right? And I'm like, I don't believe in boxes, right? So every song is a different genre. So pop, rock, like a ballad, like a country type song, like a disco-y song, EDM. And I did that strategically because, when they call me for all my awards, in the pop genre, carriere, in the, country, carriere, and everyone's gonna be like, who's this girl, right? So again, marketing is huge.
I love that. So that's a segue into your album. How can people get? We got about 8 minutes left, and I want to ask you how can we connect further and all this stuff. But I don't want to forget about the album. So can people get the album now? Like, is there a place where people can order a copy?
Yes. I'm not really doing, individual, like I have a lot of people who are interested in the vinyl record. Of course, it can be streamed on Spotify, YouTube, all the different things. But yeah, absolutely. They can reach out to me, wildwomanwithinme.com. And of course, reach out to me, Facebook, all the different socials. Of course, I'm on all of those. But yeah, if people are interested, absolutely, they can reach out. And yeah, I have a bunch of people who want the vinyl. I even want to do cassette tapes. I'm like, I just want to take, the retro.
I love that. Well, I have to add that when you say that, I went to trying to remember the name of the place. I always forget it. But anyway, it's in LA, and it's the big. It just pops into my head and then disappears again. But I can Google it and find it in 5 minutes. But it's the big record store right on Hollywood Strip, and it's been there forever.
Capitol Records?
No, not. So it's not the record company. It's like it's just this epic record store. Like, there's pictures of people in there buying their albums in the late 60s. And but it's like a full record store, 2 floors, and it's massive. Like, it's like a warehouse. It's like 3 Value Villages, since you'd know Value Village size. 3 Value Villages and then a floor higher. It's insane. It's a weird name, like Ambient Records or something. But anyway, the point of it is they have a whole a whole room for cassettes. A whole room. Like, I'm talking like a room as big as most stores. For and by the way, the irony of it, or the craziest part, when I was there, the people in there buying them were like 16, 15, 17.
Everything that's old is new again. And that's the beautiful piece of this, right? And just to segue into my chapter in the book, again, I'm not going to say it aloud because it's kind of controversial. It's Sea Life. Right. So I just kind of want to tell you a little bit about that. And again, why I decided to do things that way is that, one of my favorite artists, I always choose really like outlandish artists like Tupac Shakur, Prince, Tina Turner, people who are just outrageous, right? Freddie Mercury, people you just know are different. And you're like, ooh, I want some of that. Right. But specifically with the chapter that I wrote, he has a saying, it's called Thug Life, right? And it's an acronym, and what it stands for is the hate you give little infants F's everybody, right? And so basically I decided, again, being an Indigenous woman, I can only speak from my background, but I also noticed that, what this meant was his idea that he wanted to deliver to the world was that if you think about a child as a cup, if you put good things inside of this child, they will grow up to be good people, adults, right? But, because, we need there in certain situations, there's poverty, there's racism, there's systematic oppression, all the different things. He came from a background which was, not ideal. So he was speaking to the people, the gutter person, the martyr, the criminal, all that type of stuff. And so when I read this, I was like, it's genius. And so I decided to use the same type of thing with my chapter in this book, and it's also in my chapter, my full-length book that's coming out. But it was talking to like a hardened type of woman, and in the society, when, say, for instance, back in the day when men went out to the war, they came back, women had to do the job of both women and men, right? So this kind of just carried on through history. And so what ended up happening was that, we are where we're at right now. And again, this is mostly like, I had a conversation the other day with an individual who's like, what are you talking about? That's not the way it is. But I was like, what, And so it was more like, how everyone's talking about narcissism and, toxicity and all of this different. So there's a really, a big imbalance right now when it comes to masculinity and femininity. And it's mostly because of, society and how the evolution of time has been. And so women are like, I can do everything you can do and do it better, right? So I don't need men. And it's all this different stuff that's happening. And again, being Indigenous, we really held our women honorably and sacredly, and we seen women as equals, right? So there was no patriarchal, like we are matriarchal people, which meant that, women were equal to men, and that men understood that, men can never know and do and be what women were. So we were just held to a different esteem. So that is basically what the chapter is about, is really, women have a lot of power if they look within them and really understand, what it actually truly means to be a woman, to embody that divine feminine that we are trying to so have. But it's just like we're going against so many different things societally that, disallows us to be that most fun, soft, vulnerable self, right? So again, that's what the chapter is about. I don't want to leave that out. But yeah, it's super exciting. And thank you for allowing me to be as bold and crazy as I am, because I'm like, I don't know if he's going to like this, but thank you for that.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, at the end of the day, it's all about expression and letting people express. And just as a circle back, I'll tell people, just because I'm one of those people, if I'm doing a coffee sort of conversation, that style conversation, and I mention something, I don't want to leave it unanswered, because I always picture myself at home. If I'm watching and somebody's talking with something, I'm just that person. I always like to, especially now we're always on, I like to be able to do it. So I also found the name of the music store, the record store. It's called Amoeba Music in LA. And they're closed right now because of COVID. And they're reopening at a bigger location, 2 doors down, I think, in the fall. So that's a little plug for them. But that's the biggest record store I've ever seen in my life. And cassettes are all the rave. From what I'm seeing, cassettes and records, vinyl, are outselling everything else.
Oh, yes.
So I love that we're back to that. Now, I wanted to bring up a comment as well that somebody had shared, because it was, I think they shared it right after you read your spot from Wild Woman. So... And I can't, because of the way StreamYard works, I can't see the name of who said it, but obviously, I don't know if they know you or not, but I guess we'll find out. Because when I go to the other platform, I can see who it is, but sometimes I share the names through here. So, Jer, as we start winding down, you shared some great insight. I mean, really, we covered so much ground. Like, what was the motivator for your chapters? Even just now, you shared the story behind your chapters. The catalyst for your book, the catalyst for A Wild Woman in general. So can you tell us, I guess if we sort of to bring it close, I mentioned how can we learn more is one of the things I want to ask you. And then the second thing is, can you tell us what you have planned for the future? Obviously we know the book's about to come out. I think I saw on your website, you have a membership site coming soon. I mean, you're never stopping, right? The record is now out, but soon people will be able to get their own copy.
Second album, yes.
Oh, and working on a second album? So, yeah, there's lots in the works. So can you tell us what we can look forward to in the future? And I'm going to bring Kelly back on as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes. I had mentioned, I'm being considered right now for a Juno Award. We're submitting for a bunch of different things, awards and nominations. I'm actually also being considered for a movie right now. I had mentioned that, we're working on the development of the Carriere show. So it's going to be a mishmash of like Ellen, Jimmy Fallon, Oprah. So it's going to be like, again, just a variety show, which is going to speak from an Indigenous worldview. And it's very important for me to speak to that because, I was mentioning everything old is new again, and everything is, that used to be not cool is cool. And I wanted to speak to that in terms of being an Indigenous person. I feel like there's a lot of things that go on with, cultural appropriation and all those different things. But, I would really encourage, Indigenous people altogether to, really rise up and really take, I was speaking at a grad. And I said, don't you know how cool it is to be Indigenous? Like everybody wants to buy our moccasin and our beads and our sages and our stones and all the different things. And we have the knowledge, and all we have to do is step up and to, really share those sides of ourselves to make people to understand. I feel like in a collective world sense, we are all elevating and rising our consciousness, and we have such a knowledge and richness to be able to offer the world, right? So and to be able to make that our business, and to all the different things. And again, some people will be like, Jer, why did you say that? But again, we are all here to share and to be able to help each other get along to where it is that we're going. But we do have to rise up and honor those sides of ourselves. So and for those who are non-Indigenous, it's seeking out the Indigenous knowledge, and seeking out in the right way, following proper protocols, and seeking out those knowledge and wisdoms from us, because who better than to teach you than us, right? So yes, music is on all platforms. I'm on all different social media, Wild Woman Within, Wild Woman websites. I have, of course, the coaching. It's going phenomenally. Again, my book will be out in the summer, so it's lots. It's crazy. Sometimes I wake up and I'm like, how did I get here? It's crazy. It's beautiful. And again, just to be here with you guys I'm very thankful. So,
well, we're thankful to have you. And the website is wildwomanwithin.me.
Yes.
And just before you run off, somebody just posted this. So I'll let you just take a peek at that as well.
Yes, ancient. Yeah. Thank you for bringing beauty. Beautiful. Thank you so much for that.
Well, I put that up there because you said, somebody might be saying, why did I share that? And right after you said it, that came up. So that's why you shared it. Somebody needs to hear it. So, Jared, this has been an absolute pleasure. I knew it would be. We're so thankful to have you as part of the Blue Talks brand. You're in the latest Blue Talks book. I believe we've had you on one of the Blue Talks events before this, but I'm trying to go by memory on that. But this one for sure. This will be going over to the podcast at some point soon. We'll be interviewing you about your chapter on the podcast soon, I'm sure. Lots of great things coming, but thank you for being the light that you are in the world, and for all that you're becoming. You mentioned about recognizing who came before me and blazed the trail, but I believe some people are going to be looking down the road and saying, this is one of the girls that blazed the trail for me. So thank you for being that person.
Thanks, Corey.
Awesome. Anything you want to add, Kelly, before Jared runs off?
Well, my kids are Métis. So they've got Métis in 4 different lines in them. And so, it's near and dear and passionate to my heart too, because, I would love for my kids to know their history, right? And we found out that one of their great-great-grandmas was actually a full-blooded Cree. So, but of course, there's, with my ex-husband's family, there's that whole shame around being, a Cree, right? And so my kids have embraced it because, they never got that shame never got passed down to them. So they think it's cool that they're Métis and they have, bloodlines going way back. I had the family tree traced back to like the 1400s, and one of the great-great-great-grandparents was actually one of the first marriages in Canada. So it's just cool to have that kind of, a deep history in Canada.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because if you go and read my chapter, of course, it's very controversial, and it's kind of it's on purpose. But if you actually take the time and go through that chapter, it talks about different things that you have to become a woman, right? So it's very traditional knowledge and from the perspective of an Indigenous person and worldview, right? So that might also be good information for them to look into, because again, it's important for us to understand ourselves and to be able to understand other people, right? So I put that in there specifically to, my book is Wild Woman Master the Art of Pride, Presence, and Productivity. And in order for you to know where you want to go, have to know where you came from, right? So it's looking at it and really using those things as strengths and really, feeling a sense of pride in who you are. That way you're better able to serve the rest of the world, right? So thanks for that.
No, it's very, very true. And, and I know that that's one of the concerns with the Aboriginal Indigenous is that they're worried that their stories aren't going to be passed down. Some of the stories, but they don't want to lose their stories, and they don't want to lose the heritage and the culture and the language and all that. And I know that that's a big concern in that whole area.
Absolutely.
So doing what you're doing.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's also interesting because, again, I also was Métis until I turned 18, and then I got my Indian status. But yeah, we are a people of oral tradition, right? So we didn't necessarily, you guys know that saying, until the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? So we're very believing of this, and it's kind of the way we do things. But, I kind of believe that we have to do a balance of both worlds, right? So we don't want to lose these stories. We don't want to, lose, our rich culture. So, at some point we do have to, really step up and be willing to, teach people, even though it kind of goes against certain demographics. So it's this balance between juggling. How can we do this in a way that's going to, educate and tell people about, our worldviews, and in a way that's respectable, right? So again, it's a big job, but absolutely it can be done. So
that's great. Well, you and I will have to talk more, because one of the things that I've been wanting to do is try to get a writing workshop into the reserves and the Métis settlements, right? So that's one of the things I've been trying to do, is teach people how to write books. So yeah, we'll have to work on that.
Of course, absolutely. I look forward to it.
Good.
Awesome stuff. Well, once again, Jared, thank you so much. We'll call it a to be continued with your permission, and look to bring you back on in the future to keep sharing your important message. And just thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us today and sharing all your great insight with us.
Thank you so much. And remember to be wild.
You sure will. Thank you so much, Jared. Have an amazing day.
Bye.
Awesome. Amazing stuff. Well, Kelly, I'm going to bring our next guest right on. I want to make sure we both maximize the time. And then I think I mentioned to you that I have the new media summit I'm involved in today, and it overlaps today and tomorrow. Basically, I have like a 10-minute
too.
Oh, are you? Are you in it, or you were supposed to?
I'm supposed to be in it too, but I've been focusing on this. So yeah, great.
Yeah, well, I have like a 10-minute window between them, so I want to make sure we get things closed off for this properly before I jump onto that. So let's keep things rolling. Let's bring our next guest on, who I haven't met before, but Kelly, you have. So Kelly, and did you want to? I'll let you take over for a minute or so, Kelly, since you invited Susan to be with us today.
Great, excellent. Well, Susan and I met at a Collaborate event. So it's basically a really massive, big networking event. And I was able to pitch my story about being a burn survivor and, becoming a best-selling author and all that. And Susan says, I want you on my show. And so she interviewed me for her show. And I said, well, we have to have her on ours because she is a publisher. And so, especially since this is Author Day, we thought, this would be great to have a publisher on the show with us. So, Susan, I want to welcome you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. And Carrie, good to meet you.
Oh, thank you so much. Absolutely. And so usually where we start, Susan, is we usually get our guests to tell us a little bit about themselves before we dive in a lot further. Just a little bit of a backstory, just for the listener and viewer to get to know them. So can you tell us just a little bit about yourself before we dive in further?
Absolutely, I'd be thrilled to. The backstory goes back 30 years when I started as an entrepreneur after being made redundant 3 times, and I set out on my own. And I wanted to differentiate myself in the marketplace. I was in PR, marketing, training. And so I went into the trade show industry as a complete stranger, complete unknown. And over 25 years went from being a total unknown in that world to the go-to expert in that area. I had a publishing company alongside of that just to publish my own work, because traditional publishers really weren't very interested in trade show books. And I think you can think why, even though it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Any event, about 10 years ago, I lost my passion for the industry and decided to focus full-time on the publishing company, which over time I'd attracted book coaches who wanted their authors published. And over the time, I've published over 400 titles. And I just love doing it. And my main focus is really the author marketing side of it, because I want people to be able to go from that unknown author to author authority. So that's really 30 years in a real nutshell, Corey and Kelly. So
Wow. No, amazing. And so, Kelly, I don't know. I'll let you dive in first if you have a question you may want to ask about the publishing side of things. This is a question we get often asked. Should I get the help of a publisher? Should I go it all on my own? Why should I do which? What's the difference between a publisher? What's the difference between a traditional publisher or a publisher that's a little more entrepreneurial? So those are all the questions we get. But Kelly, I'll let you maybe jump in if you have one of those specifically you want to ask, or one of your own.
That's exactly, the big question that a lot of people come to me is, should I be with a publisher or should I self-publish? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, it depends what they want to do for the book, with the book, or they want the book to do for them. Many people want to go after a traditional publisher because it sounds good. I mean, I've been published 4 times by a traditional publisher, but the fact is that, it's not what it used to be. 20 years ago, as you well know, it's changed very much. And as a first-time author, you have to have a very, very strong marketing platform if you want to go after a traditional publisher, because that's what they're interested in. They're interested in you being able to help them sell books. They're not going to do it for you. So if you want them to take you on, you better have, a big list of people who are going to buy that book from them. Also, timing. To go the traditional route could take 18 months before it gets onto into the bookstores or into any kind of distribution. Whereas if you self-publish or go through a hybrid like myself, Avivia Publishing, then you can do it within a few months. That's the big question people say to me. Well, how long is it going to take? And, once the book's written, it's just a matter of getting it edited, getting design done, and hey, let's put it out to market. So that's really, the difference. And we allow you to be self-published, but under a publisher banner. So that's the difference that we have in the marketplace.
That's excellent. Love it. Corey, go ahead. I know you always have tons of questions. Go for it.
No, I was just going to ask, one of the things that people say often, and Kelly, you and I were chatting about this earlier, but one of the things people often say is, I can't wait to get a publisher so that basically I can sit back and wait for the royalty checks to roll in, and and think that, okay, I wrote a great book, now I'm done.
Yeah.
And usually I'll say, okay, so you wrote a great book, now you're starting.
Yes.
Now that everything starts. So can you talk to that a little bit as well? I think
absolutely.
People have a misnomer that the publisher is going to do everything for them and they don't have to do a thing after they write the book.
Well, and that's why I mentioned the fact of traditional publishing, that's exactly the mentality that often authors have, Corey. Exactly what you said is, you write a book and it's like, okay, the publisher's going to take it over and then I'm going to be rich and famous. And that just isn't going to happen. You've got to still sell it. And you're right. Once you've written the book, that's just the beginning of the journey. And the same question I get too is, well, how long do I have to keep marketing this book? And I was like, well, how long do you want to keep selling it? It's like, it's entirely up to you. This is your baby. You've got to take care of it. It's literally bringing a baby into the world, and you've got to nurture it just like any child. Feed it and nurture it and clothe it and help it grow. And this is just what you have to do with your book. You have to take that on. And so, yes, it's not going to happen, but you just sit back and expect the royalty checks to come in. Now, I feel very fortunate. I mean, my books are 10, 15 years old, and I'm still getting royalty checks from the publisher, but they're minimal. I mean, I'm not retiring on that. And but the fact is, it's still selling. And that's what's important. But, if you self-publish or publish through a hybrid publisher like myself, Avivia Publishing, then literally, you can keep selling, you make the profits on the book, and you can do what you want with it. But as far as I'm concerned, and I know Kelly's very into this as well, because she and I have had this conversation, it's not about selling books. if you want to get rich, you're not going to get necessarily rich on the book unless you sell it in, hundreds of thousands. But you get rich by speaking, training, coaching, putting on online courses, getting known out there as an expert, being a thought leader. That's what's going to bring you the income. And that's what's going to help you get recognized as an expert in your field, which is really what I look to educate my authors to do, is literally to look at being that expert in the field.
Yeah, I so love that you shared that, and especially about the book, the fact that when do you want, or like when somebody asks you, do I have to promote it forever? I mean, I love that you came back and said, depends. Do you want to sell copies forever? And it makes me think of, we had Kelly, was it? I think it was Harry Paul we had on earlier with, I don't know if you might be familiar with the fish book.
Yep.
So he was talking about how, like now, where was he saying he still puts books, Kelly? Like he was saying like, I know what it was. He said in his neighborhood, they have those take a book, give a book, take a book. Those little libraries.
Yeah, libraries, the little book library boxes. Yeah.
Yeah, and he says he goes and takes like new copies of his book and puts it in there to keep it circulating.
Fantastic.
The book sold 6 million copies.
Yes.
And I mean, he doesn't have to keep doing that, but he's still doing it because he believes in the book, he believes in its impact, and he wants it to still keep circulating. So to your point, he hasn't said, okay, I'm done now because. So yes. I love that you said that.
Yeah, it's so funny you put the fish up, because my Riches and Niches, How to Make It Big in a Small Market, which is the most recent international bestseller, also has fish on it. So there's a fish theme here, I think, Kari.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
When I've had people say that to me, how are your books selling? And I say, well, they sell when I market them.
Yes. Exactly. But I have this everywhere. It's in my signature, which is real estate that many people forget about. It's free real estate. On every single email, you put international best-selling author of. And I mean, I know Kelly's got that on hers. And it's like, yes, why not? Promote it all the time. I write a lot of testimonials for authors, and I'm always putting, Susan Friedmann, international best-selling author of Riches and Niches, How to Make It Big in a Small Market. I mean, you've just got to keep it alive and well and living in the present time,
I'll just add to that, Susan, because you made me question, what do I have in my signature right now? Because I have like, it's a good sized signature, because again, it's prime real estate. And so I have my TEDx talks, like I have the videos for them because they always have credibility. But anyway, one of the lines is, I'm posting it in here so people can see it, put my, I guess my, where my mouth is. But basically it says, order your copy of the international best-selling book of Why and How, published by Morgan James, forward by James Redfield and then I have the website.
Perfect.
And so that's my email signature, and it's been there for, well, I didn't even remember what was there. So it's been there at least for a year, probably.
And I apologize, I don't know your signature. I know Kelly's, but I didn't know yours. But that's exactly what you need to be doing. Yes.
Yeah, and we haven't emailed back and forth yet. So once we do, you will.
Yeah.
But it's funny you say that, because the other thing I did, and this is a side note, but it's still related, is in my email signature, the next thing I have used to be my TEDx talks first. But now what I have is my so I founded Blue Talks, obviously, this brand we're talking on, and I did a talk at Harvard. And because Harvard has so much cachet, it's now below the book. It says, watch my Blue Talk on customer service from Harvard University. Perfect. But again, it's credibility, right? So
it's absolute credibility. Yeah. And that's what you're looking for all the time, is that credibility. The book gives you credibility in the marketplace as an expert. And I was just talking to one of my authors this morning, and it does exactly that. It's like this huge business card, big, heavy doorstop, a big business card that you can present to people and say, hey, look, this is who I am. And nowadays, if you tout yourself as an expert in an area or have expertise in an area and you want to be on the speaking circuit, you better have a book. They're expecting that. They really are.
It's probably the bare minimum now to
Oh,
entry.
yes. Well, you look at all the celebrities. I mean, they want to get on, the speaking circuit because that's where they make money. But in order to do that, they have to have a book. And whether it's, many of them are ghostwritten, as we know, but that doesn't matter. Who cares? It's still their name on it. And, they're the expert in that field.
So we have a question, Susan, that was posed earlier, and I wanted to wait till you were on to ask you this question. I'll get your take on it. And Kelly, feel free to chime in on this as well. I'm going to put it up on the screen. Can you see that, Susan?
Should you think differently about publishing if you know that you'll be writing a book that'll be one of 4 in a series? First of all, I absolutely love the idea that you're thinking in terms of more than one. A series is very strong. People write one book and they think they're done. In fact, if you look at many of the, well-known authors, their first book never went anywhere, but maybe their second book, but the third book did, and the fourth one. So the fact that, this person is writing, that they're writing and thinking of a series already is brilliant. And I love that. And yes, I mean, even if it hasn't been written yet, all 4 of them, you can be saying this is the first of a series of 4. You can already be talking about it that way. So people know that something's coming. And if they like you as an author, they're going to want everything that you have. And so that's what you also want. You want them to like you and trust you and become a fan. Yeah.
So definitely think of it in terms of a bigger series if you're writing a series than thinking of it as a single book, in terms of marketing at least.
Yes. And even if you have one book, you can split it up. Because that's actually what I've done with several of my books, is in fact take it and split it up into different sort of mini books. And so then you've got multiple books that cover a subject matter, which was great in the trade show industry because I had multiple, I've got 17 books, and many of them I've done exactly that. I've taken a bigger book and split it up into smaller sections because people like bite size. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny. We just talked about I was saying about Harry Paul, and he worked for Ken Blanchard, and he talked about how Ken Blanchard is. Remember this, Kelly? He was saying about how Ken Blanchard's focus. One of the things was it has to be small enough that they can read it on a business flight.
Yes.
However,
exactly.
The flight, I want them to be able to read it in one sitting. He said because he was looking at the statistics of how many people stop reading a book after chapter 1, and he said I want the whole book to be like just the size of a chapter. So you can read the whole book in a sitting. So when you said bite size, that's what it made me think of for sure, is that that's what we're looking for more.
Yeah. And I'd love to share something with you. In fact, the very first book that I had traditionally published is Exhibiting at Trade Shows, Tips and Techniques for Success. And this was by a company called Chris Publications. And their whole theme was read this book in 50 minutes, cover to cover. That was their marketing spiel, So what I did with this one, I didn't want to just sell it in onesies and twosies. So I went to people in the trade show industry and I said, would you like to give this book away? And so exhibit companies took it on and published, and we sold 2,000 copies of this to one particular company. And so I said, that's good. Okay, let's look at another. This was custom exhibits. And then I said, okay, well, let me try the portable exhibit market, because that's also a very big market. So I went to them with one of the companies that I knew well, and I said, how would you like to publish this book and give it away? And they said, well, it's too big, it's too expensive. But if you write, a smaller version of it, we'll give it away as what we know now as a lead magnet. And so I was like, great, let's take, the important parts. And we did. And we produced this, which this one's in French, but it was tips and techniques as well for the trade show industry. They bought 450,000 of these, had them translated into 5 languages. This is all from one book.
Wow.
So I want to say that there are different ways of doing things with your books. You just have to be very savvy about it. And Kelly knows well that I'm very much into niche marketing. And when you're in a niche, you can do things like this. So I'm happy to talk to anybody on the line who wants to think about that.
Well, and I'll add in too, I mentioned this earlier, Susan, when people say to me, because I do run into it a lot where people come to me thinking that the book is going to be write the book, become a millionaire. And when we talk about the fact that a lot of cases, the money in the book is on the back end. And whatever that looks like, that could be speaking opportunities, coaching, that could be a program that they're going into because they discover you through your book or whatever you. But I just to back it up, the power of books, I said this earlier at 1 o'clock, because I had my notifications, I had to keep them on because if, like yourself, if you couldn't get here and you reach out to me, I need to be able to help. So I have notifications on, so I see things I wouldn't normally see. And so I saw from 1 o'clock to I think it was 1:45. At 1 o'clock, there was an email that I just think it pop up as a notification that somebody had signed up for my book called The Book of Public Speaking. And that book has never been released as a print book. I'm going to do that soon, but it's always just been a lead magnet, completely. Never sold a copy, never intended to. And that lead came in, quote unquote, from I haven't been doing podcasting or anything lately, but I do a lot of podcasting interviews where I drop the name of that book. I say, here's your freebie. And so that was from at some point, like that lead that came in today could have been from a month and a half ago, an interview I did, and it popped up. But then while we were on here, I talked about my other book, The Book of Why and How. And then I saw, and I was telling Kelly this, I saw a message come up saying somebody had just signed up for the audio version. And the reason I know that is because in the book, on the front page, it says, hey, thanks for grabbing my book. Do you want the free audio? Because, of course, that's for my email list. And so I saw that this person, who I know who it is, was watching us here and then obviously bought my book and then signed up for the audio version. Well, that was 2 people on my email list in 45 minutes.
That's amazing.
And both without me saying, hey, go grab something from my email list, from work I had already done before. So that's the power of a book. Absolutely. People make money from it directly.
Yeah. I mean, just keep doing it. And love the fact that you've got an audio book, because that really is the trend. And I know Kelly knows this, is that people are listening to books more and more. They don't have time to read necessarily, but listening, you can do it, in the car. That's my favorite place. On the plane, mowing the lawn, taking out the garbage, making dinner. You can listen to a book. I had lunch, about an hour ago, and I was listening to a book. I belong to a book club, and I was listening to the book. So yeah, you take advantage of this time, and yeah. We're consuming books differently now, and they need to be shorter, they need to be punchier, and also the audio version and all the different formats. Another question that I get a lot is, well, if I put the book out in ebook, then they're not going to buy, the printed version or the audio version. I said, absolutely not. They sometimes, and I've done it myself, I've bought the ebook, I bought the printed version, and I bought an audio book. And I'm not the only one out there doing that. So you think in terms of it as a bundle. Yeah, I've got all these different ways we consume books in so many different ways these days.
Well, I want to bring up a comment that was a follow-up to your point about the 1 in 4 series. He made a comment since, but I want to also add something you just said there, Susan, because I think I agree completely, and I think there's a 2-part factor there. On one hand, you need to think about the fact that certain people read different ways. And so if you don't have the digital version, there's certain people you just won't get because they're just not going to read a printed book. There's other people like me who would rather read a printed book. And then there's other people who'd rather listen to the book. And so it's not even, I don't think you even have to think about competing against your own product. You're just bringing in a different listener that you wouldn't get otherwise, or a different reader. But having said that, I have somebody in my network, and I think she bought the digital. Didn't even ask her. And she won. We do contests every now and then when we're doing this event, and she won a copy of the printed book after that. But she had only the digital Kindle version, and she read it near the holidays. And I'll let her tell her story when she's ready to do it, because she's going to make a video for me about the experience. But she was ready to throw in the towel on her business because of something unique that happened. And then she's like, I'm just tired of it. Maybe it's time to move on. And then she read my book, which it's kind of wild because it wasn't necessarily written to say, I'm gonna sort of help save you from throwing in the towel on something. It was more designed to help you find your purpose. But it reminded her, because she's reading the stories I've written about people that were born with no arms and achieved great things and still had a smile on their face. And she said those stories inspired her. Wait, what am I doing quitting this? I love doing this. And what I'm experiencing is nothing compared to what they had to experience. And the point is, she said, and this, I won't say her name, but she's a really high level influencer. It really surprised a lot of people. And she said what she read changed everything. And within a month, she earned more revenue, I think, than she said the previous year. That had nothing to do with the book, because it doesn't teach you how to do that. But it's just what it inspired her to do. But my point of all that is, imagine if I said, I'm not putting the Kindle out because then she won't buy my printed book.
Yeah, well, it's the same reaction is, giving it away, giving your book away. I mean, I would love for every one of your viewers to have a copy of this, and I'll give you the ebook version of it for anybody who wants it, because I mean, I want them to consume the information. That's what's important here. So that's my gift to anybody who's on here who would like that. And I don't know how you do the where they can get it, the email address. Do I put it in the chat or something?
Well, I can put it in for you. And normally at the end, I make sure we ask about that too. So I'm glad you brought it up, though, because we may not mention that part. So where can people access it? Is it a website, or is it just send you an email, or what works best?
I'm going to put that. I just put it in the chat for you. That's the email address, and people can send me an email, say they'd like a copy of the Riches and Niches book, or the book that I mentioned on the Blue Network, the Blue Talks, and I'd be more than happy to send it to them.
Well, I'm going to make sure I grab one too, but
absolutely.
But I'm also putting it in here in the comments. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to put up Raymond's comment that he made after, because you mentioned about people are looking for help to do that. I think that's what he's referencing in the last line there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Raymond, just send me an email and we should talk. Yes.
Yeah. Well, the email address, Raymond, I'm putting it in right now, so you'll see it any second here. So I just wanted to put that up while it was present. So Kelly, I'll pass it over to you to see if you have another question for Susan, or at the same time I say that, Kelly disappeared, I think. Oh, she's
there
back.
she is.
I'll pass it over to you for a question if you have, while I'm just typing in this in the comments.
Oh.
I just love that we have you here, Susan, as a publisher, because we've had a lot of discussions today about, self-publishing, traditional publishing, hybrid publishing, what is the best way to go. And one of the things I love about your story is that you are also an author.
Yeah, I mean, I've done it. I've, as I say, I've written 17 books, and I've had 3 of them have been international bestsellers. So, and I keep selling books that were published in, I think, 2003. My dummies book, I wrote a dummies book, meeting and event planning for dummies, and I've written a For Idiots guidebook. So I've got a bit of credibility out there in the marketplace. Plus all of the books that I've self-published, obviously through Avivia Publishing. So they're Avivia published books, but yes. But I believe in it. And funnily enough, you say that. I actually started my publishing company, as I think I said earlier, just to publish my own work. I mean, it was completely selfish, because one of my mentors had said, when early on in my business, I said, well, how do I get known out there? And he said, write a book. He said, doesn't matter if nobody buys it. He said, just write the book and you are the author of. And I'm like, I want to be published, but yes, I write the book. And that's actually when I started the journey with this. And Chris Publications turned me down 3 times before they accepted it. So, I haven't been, like J.K. Rowling's, I mean, what was it, 300 times or 230 times? I don't know, between her and Jack Canfield, they've got these history of umpteen rejections. I only had 3, but that was pretty disheartening at the time. But I still went for it. And I've got another great story. Have I got time to tell it?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I wrote Meeting and Event Planning for Dummies, and we literally, it was going to go to press towards the end of 2001. Well, if you seem to remember, in 2001, the 9th of September in 2001, no, what was the 11th of September, 9th of, yeah, when there was I think it was the 11th, when 2001, when the planes hit the towers and everything. Yes. So any event, 9/11, that's it. Thank you. I was just like thinking there was a 9 and there was an 11 somewhere. You know? Any event, 9/11 happened, and the publisher came back to me and said, we're not going to press with this book. Because 9/11, there are not going to be any more meetings, there aren't going to be any more events. And I was like, are you crazy? Are you absolutely crazy? That, we'll get over this. It's just like this pandemic. We're going to get over it. Things are going to, it's going to have a new normal. But the fact is that we are going to get over it. So I found somebody at Wiley, that printed by Wiley, the Dummies books, and she was on my side, but she said, you have to make a case to the sales team because they're the ones who say yay or nay whether this should go to press. And so I worked for 6 months getting facts, figures about the industry, what was going to happen. And I presented it, and she was my mouthpiece because I couldn't talk to them directly, but I gave her everything. I laid it all out, and she presented it to the sales team. And it came out in 2000, I think it was 2003. So the beginning of 2003, the book was published. So if I had not taken it upon myself, and I call it my David and Goliath story, here I am, little David, and they are big Goliath, but we went for it, and I'm still getting royalties from the book. So,
what do you about relaunching a book? Like a couple of my books are like 10, 11 years old. So I was, wondering, people have been telling me, well, Cal, you need to relaunch your book, put a new cover on it and relaunch it. What are your thoughts on that?
If you think it's going to make a difference, maybe it could have a facelift. But the fact is, you just keep marketing it. I mean, I keep my Riches and Niches cover hasn't changed. And this was written, I think, in 2007, but it's evergreen material, most of it. And so, I never even thought of redoing the cover. The publisher wanted to do an update, but then decided they didn't want to put the money into it. But yeah, I mean, I just think you just have to keep the title vibrant. I don't think, the cover is, and this too, it's just the packaging. If you don't like the cover, get it redone. Absolutely. But if you like it and you love it and you still think there's, the book's relevant, hey, keep marketing it.
Well, I've been too busy to relaunch my books because I'm launching other people's books. So I haven't had to be able to do my own book because I'm coaching people that, to do their book.
Exactly. Yeah, we're like the cobbler's children, who don't get their shoes because the cobbler's working on everybody else's shoes. But you're absolutely right. That does happen. I mean, I would like to be able to put out another book, but writing something at the moment, I'm too busy with everybody else's stuff. So, I know that feeling. Oh.
I was going to add into that too. I had to go grab the door here. Somebody's at the door. But when you mentioned about Kelly relaunching a book, it made me think of a lot of times you'll see what big authors will do is they'll relaunch their book on an anniversary date. Mm-hmm. And so it made me think of when you said that this time around, for some reason, it popped in my head, Jack Canfield with the Success Principles. I think it was like the 20th or 15th anniversary. Maybe 10th. But anyway, he republished the book and he was going on making all the news rounds and all the media rounds and podcasts and everything else, even though that was a book that it was quite successful and already published once. but he was approaching it almost like it was a brand new book launch. So, you know, if Jack with Chicken Soup for the Soul, what are they at, 600 or 700 million copies sold, Kelly, and he still believes you can relaunch a book, I would take that, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey,
I mean, one of my friends, Susan Rowan, wrote How to Work a Room. It's all about networking, and it's been on the market, I think, 25 years. And she keeps saying, you know, she keeps celebrating its birthday and every milestone, you know. I mean, she's Jewish, and she said, oh, she gave it a bar mitzvah, you know, on its 13th birthday, you know, and things like that. I mean, just funny things she comes up with that just to keep the book alive. So, hey, it's all marketing. You know, we all know that. It's like you just keep it alive and well and living in the present, as I say.
Well, it's funny when you say that too. I never even thought of it this way, Kelly, but you and I had chatted about this in the past on here. But the Book of Why one, that book was released as a self-published book 2.5, 3 years before. And I went through incarnations. I brought it to Kickstarter and had a really successful crowdfunding campaign launch. Then 12 months almost later, I did a Publishlizer campaign and had just as many sales as Kickstarter. And then the publisher brought it on after that. So my book's kind of been re-released numerous times. And in fact, just the last version is the only version to have endorsements in it. So, I mean, you know, I'm even focusing on a book that was out 3 years and getting endorsements from T. Harv Eker and John Gray now that are going in the book. So Kelly, I mean, there's your answer there, right? They were even willing to bring that back on. So to them, it's like it's essentially like a relaunch.
Yeah, right. You can do a new and improved version. You can do a second or third edition of the book. You know, there are always different ways of re-releasing it, so to speak. But yes. Interestingly enough, too, that I have, you know, going back to the original question about whether you should be self-published or traditionally published, people who come through Avivia, I've had a few authors who've actually gone from Avivia and transitioned to major publishers. So it doesn't mean just because you come, for instance, with Avivia or you self-publish, if you sell enough books and you can get the attention of a traditional publisher, they may take you on after you've got a track record. So that's also something to consider. It doesn't mean just because you go one route, you can't go another. Now, I've also had the opposite happen, where one of my authors, in fact, was traditionally published, and the publisher did not want to bring out a second edition, but she felt the book needed a second edition because it was in the market, you know, had changed, and they weren't willing to put the money into it. So she came to me and we published it, and it's probably my most successful book. But she does all the work. I mean, I get the inquiries. Can you send me a desk copy? I just forward everything, you know, to Helen, and she takes care of it. Yeah.
Wow. I have one more quick question on that note. But yeah, I think that it's important to recognize that there still needs to be strategy involved. So what you said there, maybe think of, Susan, that I hear other things from people. Like I hear another thing person will say to me, and I think I usually like to try to tell them at least a little bit about the book industry so they know otherwise. But people that'll say, well, I'm just going to self-publish now so I can get the book out, and then I can convince publishers will then be able to see how great it is, and then they'll buy it. And I'll say to them, well, what's your game plan for selling copies? Well, I'm not worried about that. But once they see how beautiful it is, and I try to explain to them, that's the worst of both worlds, because then you're going to have a book out and they're going to say in their head, it didn't even sell. When you put it out, how are we going to sell it? And so your point,
track record. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the key thing. Like, who was it that said it to us, Kelly, today? Was it Mark? Said that they're not, you know, saying it's a best-selling book is brilliant for your branding. It's brilliant for the audience marketing, all that stuff. But a publisher doesn't care about that. What they want to know is how many copies you sold.
Exactly. Right. It's all about the numbers. That's all they care about. Because, and going back to what I said, if you want a traditional publisher, you better have a really strong, you know, all bells and whistles marketing platform that you can demonstrate to them, because that's what they want. I mean, it's an ego thing to get published by a traditional, you're not going to get money. You know, they barely give you money now. You know, the days of the six-figure royalties and commissions, they don't give those anymore in the same way as they used to. So yeah. So I think there are all these myths floating around that you alluded to, Corey, that just don't exist, and people have still got it in their head. It's the same with Amazon. Oh, I'm going to post my book to Amazon, and that's all I have to do. Well, Amazon's only a shop window. You've got to bring people to the shop window. They're not going to sell it for you, but people have got this illusion that, oh, all I have to do is post my book to Amazon, and all of a sudden some kind of miracle's going to happen and the rabbit's going to jump out of the hat, and it's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people can get published now, how many books get published every year, and how a lot of those myths still exist year after year after year until somebody does a book themselves and then goes, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought it was going to be.
Exactly. It's funny. I wrote an article called "Stuck in the Book Launch Doldrums," because you launch it and you sell it to all your friends and family, and then all of a sudden there's crickets. And after about a few months, you suddenly realize I put all this blood, sweat, and tears into this book, and it isn't selling. Nobody's buying it. Is because you're not doing anything to help sell it. It's not going to suddenly sprout legs. And
well, and to that end, and just before we bring things to a close, and Kelly, I'll pass it back to you in case there's a question you want to ask before we let Susan run. But it makes me think of, for example, Rachel Hollis now. Has her I don't know what her new book sales is, but the previous one, what is it, Girl Wash Your Face, her biggest one, sold it had like 3 million copies sold in the cover. And I remember being at an event and everybody's like talking about it and saying, and she spoke at the event, which is why. And they were like, oh, I before she spoke, they're like, oh my gosh, that's what I want to be, like Rachel Hollis. I just want to put a podcast out and have 1 million listeners and then sell 3 million books. And then she gets on the stage and shared her story about how she wrote 2 books that flopped and how she basically, even the book that did well, she had a podcast with millions of listeners, and she still had to get on every show, do every drive time interview, do everything, send it to the review places. She had to do just as much work as everybody else. The only thing she had as an advantage is she had a big platform by then, but they're ignoring the fact that she had 2 books that bombed and all that other stuff. And just because people were saying, yeah, it's so amazing, she just arrived overnight.
Yeah, well, and I had a mentor that said it takes 15 years to become an overnight success. Now, I try and cut that short for my my authors but the fact is, it rarely happens overnight. You do have these freak successes, but then they can also be a 1-day wonder or 2-day wonder, and they're gone. They're here today and gone tomorrow. But we want longevity. So, and that takes time to build. You ask every celebrity what they went through. We only see their successes. We don't see all the hard work, the years of practicing and doing things. Same with any musician. Hey, look at our sports celebrities as well. I mean, the hours that they devoted from whatever age they started. So it just didn't happen overnight. And that's another myth too. So
yeah, even the ones that look like it, like Justin Bieber, you could go to somebody like that and say he was discovered on the internet and it was quick. But look, that kid at like 6 years old was playing drums and guitar in his house and learning these instruments, and then to sustain it all these years later. So even his case, I mean, it might have looked quick and it might have happened quick once somebody saw him, the right person saw him, but he still had to get his talent to that level where he was good enough that he could capitalize on it when it happened. And then also he would have disappeared overnight if he didn't have the talent to back it up. Whether a person likes him or not, he's still got the talent to get noticed and to continue it.
Absolutely. And that's that element of marketing as well. And that stick-to-itness. You've got to have perseverance and just stick with it. And it's a rocky road. It's a roller coaster. You're going to have your ups, your downs, and there are going to be times you're like, why am I doing this? It's like I'm knocking my head against a brick wall. But yeah, not the one behind you, Corey.
No, not that one. So Kelly, I promised I'd pass it over to you with any final questions before we just ask Susan how we can learn more and then let her run and close things out.
Yeah, no, Susan, I'm really happy that we had you on the show today because
Thank you.
you helped to dispel a lot of the myths that are out there, and yeah, so thank you. It's been awesome to have you.
My pleasure. I'm a realist, and people may not like what I have to say, but I mean, I'm frank. It's like this is reality, and I wanna bust those myths because they are myths. And I hate for authors to go into, publishing their book and thinking that this magic is just going to happen by writing the book. There's a lot more to it. And that's why we've got you and Corey and myself who are helping to guide them in the right direction. So thank you, both of you. And thank you for what you both do to help this industry. It's wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you. That's so kind. And Susan, before we let you run, I mentioned I wanted to ask, I know you gave your email so that people can get a free copy of your other book, but is there any other place you would send people if they want to connect with you or learn more or just want to reach out or follow your work or any of those type of things?
Yeah, just send me an email. The other place is my podcast, which I am putting up there for you. It's bookmarketingmentors.com. And Kelly was one of my guests not long ago.
Yes, thank you. So awesome.
Yeah, actually, it should be going live shortly. So I know we recorded it a little while ago, but I will let you know when it goes live. And yes. And Corey, we should have you on as well. So I'm always looking for good people. These are practical tips and techniques. I interview experts in any aspect of marketing that can help authors just be more successful and give them ideas of what's possible with their book. And so it's a fun show. So please, it's an award-winning podcast. It's been going for 5 years, believe it or not. I can hardly believe it. I remember the first one I did. I was like, ah! I also don't want to listen to the first one I did.
I've been there. I've been down the podcasting road and have a couple myself, and I totally get it. And yeah, we should chat about that, and I should look at having you on to my show. My main show has been around 9 years. It's called Let's Do Influencing, which is a play on Let's Do Coffee, but it's about how do you create influence, whether it's one to many or one to one. And so you'd be a perfect fit to talk about how.
Thank you. That'd be wonderful. I love it.
Let's talk offline about doing what they like to call a podcast swap.
Yes.
For lack of a better name.
I love it. I love it. We're good people. And as I said, you guys are doing a fabulous job. And anybody who wants to chat, I would love to talk to them about their book or what their vision is, what they want the book to do for them. So that's really my big question that I always ask. What do you want the book to do for you, and who is your target or your niche audience? Often that's another one that people don't spend enough time on and understand who their audience is. So that plays a big role. But yes, the riches and niches, they can get a copy of that. And and then the book marketing mentors. How's that? Is that good for your listeners?
Yeah, no, that is absolutely. You gave them two great tools, both very big value adds because they can listen to the show and learn more about the book marketing and book business world, and then also they can get a copy of your book for free. So that's a couple of really nice value adds. So thank you so much, Susan, and I think it's also a great way for them to discover all things Susan. So that's perfect.
Thank you. Awesome. Yes, lovely. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Susan. Awesome stuff. So Kelly, we'll bring things to a close right away just because I'm going to be just running from one to another. But I just wanted to, first of all, thank you so much as usual for being here with me today. We had some amazing guests, covering all the way from publishing to authors that have sold millions of copies of their book to authors who are just, Jer is just about to launch her book, but she's doing so many other things related to storytelling. So we covered a wide, I'm going to say we cast a wide net today. And and another big one coming tomorrow as well. I'm just looking here, as I say, to tell people what they can expect tomorrow. And also mention to people if they want to learn more about Blue Talks, We've been saying it off and on throughout the day, but they can go to bluetalks.com. On there, you can now find the book series. You can find the link to the podcast. You can find the only thing that's not on there is the link to the virtual event. We got to add that soon. But also you can find the link to our YouTube channel, which we do air interviews from the virtual event. So pretty much everything Blue Talks you can find at bluetalks.com. And then tomorrow, what you can find on the event, really exciting. We're going to be doing a first. We're going to have you on first, but then we're going to be doing it first, which you and I are both going to be doing separate interviews at the same time. That's the first time. So people will be able to, I'm going to recommend they tune in here. So we'll have you on here and they tune in here because this will be on the main platforms. And then the other one that I'm doing, some people will just catch it by nature by where I'm promoting it, but also then they can watch the replay. And so that's with John Lee Dumas from Entrepreneurs on Fire. So I'm interviewing John, separate from you interviewing Woody Woodrow, pretty close to the same time, and Charmaine Hammond, who you invited to be a part of this. And then we finish out with the Monk Dude. So Dada, the Monk Dude. So Dada has a couple of books. I know Charmaine is a master marketer, and I know she can bring us some great insight. Woody it's really cool. Woody has a book called You Are the Rock Star. You'll mostly be interviewing him. I think I'll have 15 minutes with Woody. But what's really cool is he used your launch process to launch his book at number one, I think in like 20 categories or something crazy like that. And so it's really cool because we'll be able to talk about that and he can talk to that, which will be, it's really cool because it's right after your talk tomorrow, your interview. So it's good timing and it's a good segue. So we have a really big day, a really cool day. Like I said, how many is that? That's 5 tomorrow? Yeah, 5 guests tomorrow, including yourself. And we have a dual interview happening at the same time, which we've never done. So it should be an exciting day tomorrow.
It is. It's going to be a very exciting day tomorrow. Great.
Awesome. Anything else you want to add, Kelly, before we let everybody
No, I just thought it was an excellent day with lots of great content and lots of golden nuggets from every single one of the presenters. And that's what this is all about, is really, helping people to amplify their messages so that they can get out there and make an impact and an income. So it was great.
Impact and income. I mean, if at the end of the day, I often talk about, like, people always say, well, it shouldn't be about money. But I think if you can do what you love and sustain yourself, then you can actually do more for others. But if you can tie the two of them together, impact and income, I think you're serving everybody better, yourself and others. So I love that you said impact and income.
Well, and nowadays we have to make an income. It's simple as that. If we want to, take our business to the whole different level, we have to make an income. I know that I'm a single mom with 3 teenagers and they all live with me at home. And if I'm not bringing in the money, how are we going to have a roof over our head and food in our bellies? So it's all about, impact and income.
Yeah. And if you're not doing that, then you're not going to be probably serving as well as you could be, because you're going to be focused on the fact that you're struggling to put a roof over the head and food on the table. So exactly. I think they both go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
So I'm just glad you mentioned. So thanks everybody for joining us today. As I mentioned, you can find everything you need at bluetalks.com or join us here tomorrow, same time, 11 Eastern. We'll kick things off once again. Thank you as always, Kelly. Thank you everybody for joining us. And I'm going to let everybody run and have a magical rest of your day.
Bye.